Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Sarah Scazzi. Sarah Scazzi, 15, lives with her family in the small town of Avatrana, Italy, which has a population of about 6,000 people, all of whom are closely connected and know each other. Sarah is known to be an energetic and cheerful girl, full of vitality that often surpasses that of her peers, and she is very kind. On August 26, Sarah had a meeting scheduled with her cousin, Sabrina. They had planned to go to the beach with their friends. Since they lived close to each other, Sarah only had to walk about 600 meters to Sabrina's house. She left early to arrive by 2 p.m., following her usual route through a quiet area, which typically took about 10 minutes. However, this time Sarah was late, which was unusual for her. They had planned to meet early to wait for their friends and prepare for the trip, and her tardiness worried Sabrina. At 2:42 p.m., two other girls came to see Sabrina, but Sarah was still missing. Sabrina told her friends that she had tried calling Sarah several times, but her calls and texts went unanswered. To prove her concern, Sabrina made several more calls, but all were unsuccessful. The situation worried the girls. It seemed that Sarah might be in danger, and they needed to find out what had happened. They decided to follow the path Sarah had taken. When they arrived at her house, they saw no sign of her along the way. It appeared that she had disappeared. At home, Sarah's mother confirmed that her daughter had left more than an hour ago and was supposed to be at Sabrina's house by now. The worried mother followed her daughter's usual route, but found no signs of where she might have gone. After several hours without hearing from Sarah, the mother decided to contact the police. Fortunately, the police quickly began searching for Sarah, starting in a limited area. They checked for traces and then expanded the search area, but found no evidence of a struggle, assault, or kidnapping. Meanwhile, the police spoke to people close to Sarah, including family, neighbors, classmates, and other members of the community. They explored every possible clue. Initially, it seemed that Sarah might have been kidnapped for ransom, and the criminals had completely covered their tracks. However, this theory was soon dismissed. Sarah came from an ordinary family, raised by a single mother, while her brother worked as a bricklayer. It was unlikely that such a financially struggling family would attract the attention of kidnappers. The next theory considered the possibility that Sarah had run away. However, Sarah had no reason to run away. She had a good relationship with her family and friends. Nevertheless, the police persisted in their investigation and found Sarah a month and a half later, on October 6, 2010. Her body was discovered at the bottom of a well in the rural area of Avatrana. An autopsy revealed that she had been strangled, with significant marks on her neck. Initially, the investigation was hampered by a lack of clues. Family members were unaware of any conflicts Sarah had with others. She did not appear to have any enemies or anyone who would want to harm her. Sarah avoided illegal drugs and other negative influences. In an effort to gather information, the police reviewed her social media pages, but found no valuable clues. Her accounts appeared normal for a teenager, with very few photos and posts. Sarah's mother gave her diary to the police, hoping it would help solve the mystery of her daughter's death. The diary contained intriguing information, and Sarah confided in her. In 2010, 15-year-old Sarah was in high school and became close friends with 20-year-old Sabrina Misseri, a cosmetologist. They shared many common interests, especially in the beauty industry, which Sarah wanted to pursue. They kept in regular contact until a man named Ivan Rusa came along. Sabrina quickly developed feelings for him and tried to get closer to him. However, feelings also developed between Ivan and Sarah. The warmth they felt for each other did not escape Sabrina's notice, and she became jealous. Sabrina and Sarah often argued, and just before the murder, they had another serious conflict in front of several witnesses. During this confrontation, Sabrina accused Sarah of being interested in Ivan. This accusation affected Sarah deeply, especially because it happened in front of others and quickly became a rumor. As the rumors about Ivan and Sarah spread, the relationship between Sabrina and Sarah deteriorated. In her diary, Sarah mentioned that Sabrina was very angry that night and that she had never seen Sabrina like that before, which made her feel scared. This anger could have created a strong motive for the crime. Did Sabrina really strangle Sarah out of jealousy and resentment? The police interviewed several witnesses, including friends who were part of the group that Sarah was supposed to go to the beach with. Through their accounts, along with information from Sarah's family, they pieced together the events that led to her final hours. On the morning of August 26, Sarah and Sabrina had planned to go to the beach after lunch with some of their friends. According to Sarah's mother, she quickly went shopping to prepare for the outing. When Sarah returned, she quickly ate lunch, changed, and left the house around 1:30 p.m. Sarah was preparing to go to Sabrina's house, but once she left, no one saw her again. At 2:42 p.m., friends arrived at Sabrina's house, and she tried to call Sarah back when they arrived but was unsuccessful. At this time, a forensic expert determined that Sarah had been strangled with an unknown object, possibly a belt about 2 meters long. The estimated time of death coincided with the time she was expected to arrive at Sabrina's house. The police interviewed two friends who were supposed to be going to the beach with Sabrina and Sarah and discovered some interesting information. When the two friends arrived at Sabrina's house, they found her waiting on the porch. This was uncharacteristic for her, as she usually waited for guests inside the house. Sabrina tried to stall for time and prevent them from entering. She quickly claimed that Sarah had not arrived yet. Pretending to be worried, she called Sarah's phone in front of the girls to support her story and create an alibi. During the first call, the phone rang, but no one answered. During the second call, the phone was turned off. Sabrina's feigned worry raised suspicions. The police stated that there might be more people involved in this crime than initially thought. At the well where Sarah's body was found, the police discovered tire tracks and collected fingerprints. It turned out that the tire tracks matched the grooves of Sabrina's family's car. A strange detail emerged. The timing of the evidence being destroyed and the body being dumped coincided with the time when all the girls went to Sabrina's house. Further investigation revealed that Sarah's uncle, Michel Messeri, who was also Sabrina's father, was responsible for disposing of the body. As the events unfolded, Sabrina strangled Sarah. She had little time to hide her actions, so she asked her father, Michel, to help dispose of the body. Unable to refuse Sabrina, he decided to throw it down a well. Nearby, a fire pit was found, where some of Sarah's personal belongings, including items taken from their home, were discovered. Michel attempted to destroy the evidence by burning them in the fire. Sabrina and her mother, Cosima Serrano, then became actively involved in the search for Sarah. They appeared on several television shows to announce Sarah's disappearance and seek support. This was just one of many deceptive tactics used by the criminals. They spread numerous false clues to distract the investigation. On October 6, 2010, Michel's mental state deteriorated, and he confessed to killing his niece, Sarah. Michel stated that he killed her in the garage. However, the police found his story to be inconsistent from the beginning. During the reconstruction, Michel could not demonstrate how he strangled Sarah, and his actions did not match her injuries. Michel testified that he asked to be intimate with Sarah, but she refused, which angered him. He then attacked, abused, and killed her. However, the medical examiner found no evidence of abuse, which further cast doubt on his confession. Michel took responsibility for the murder, attempting to protect his daughter, Sabrina. Meanwhile, the police gathered evidence suggesting that at least 2 people were involved in the crime. The question is who the second person. For a long time, Sabrina's mother, Cosima, did not raise any suspicion, despite her unusual behavior in television interviews. Forensic examination results showed that Sarah did not resist during the murder, suggesting that the attack was sudden or that there were at least two attackers, one of whom restrained her. It was shocking to discover that Sabrina's entire family was involved in the murder, as confirmed by their phone conversation on October 4, 2010. Several days after Michelle gave Sarah's cell phone to the police, Sabrina learned about the incident. She called her mother, expressing her fears about leaving fingerprints on Sarah's phone while staging the calls. They also discussed potential evidence left in the house and behind the garage where the murder was believed to have occurred. However, it was unclear who actually strangled Sarah during their conversation. To investigate further, the police decided to track the cell phones of all the suspects. It is surprising to learn that Cosima was in the garage at the time of the murder. It is possible that she held Sarah down, preventing her from defending herself. The day after the murder, Cosima and Sabrina went to the area where Sarah's body was later found in a well. They claimed that they were visiting a local vineyard owned by another daughter of the family, but this explanation seems unlikely. The vineyard was too far away, and they did not actually go there. Instead, they were near the well and later near where Sarah's personal belongings were burned. Evidence suggests that they knew about the body. Witness testimony indicates that Sabrina reacted unusually coldly to Sarah's murder, which is surprising given their previously close relationship. The case attracted considerable attention in the town, leading to alarming rumors. Sabrina's neighbor claimed that he saw Cosima dragging Sarah from the backyard and hiding her body in the trunk of her car. Sarah died at the same time that her friends were on their trip to Sabrina's house. She met them on the outside on the porch, trying to keep the girls from entering the house to prevent them from discovering what was happening in the backyard. The trial began on January 10, 2012. However, the hearings lasted much longer than expected, with several adjournments and new evidence emerging throughout the proceedings. It was known that Sabrina was keen on developing a relationship with Ivan Rusa, which made her jealous of Sarah. In his testimony, Ivan spoke about his relationship with Sarah, mentioning that she considered him a father figure and sent him a photo to show off her new hair color. He maintained a friendship with Sabrina. The prosecution presented a clear and accurate account of the tragedy, despite the efforts of Sabrina's family to cover up the crime. Sabrina and Cosima were later convicted of the murder of Sarah Scazzi. On April 20, 2013, the court sentenced Sabrina Misseri and Cosima Serrano to life in prison. Michelle Misseri was sentenced to 8 years in prison for concealing evidence. Although he accepted responsibility for Sarah's death, he had only intentionally concealed the body and destroyed evidence. Sabrina and Cosima were unhappy with the verdict, prompting their defense attorneys to file an appeal, which was accepted. The new trial began on November 16, 2014. During the preliminary hearing, the court determined that both suspects would remain in prison for the duration of the trial. Michelle claimed that he alone was responsible for Sarah's death, asserting that neither Sabrina nor Cosima were involved in the crime. However, by this time, the prosecution had gathered enough evidence to prove that Michelle had only intentionally concealed the body and destroyed evidence. He wanted to protect his family, so he took all the blame upon himself. On July 27, 2015, an appeals jury upheld the life sentences for Sabrina and Cosima, ensuring that they would spend the rest of their lives in prison. Since the criminals never admitted guilt, it is difficult to determine the exact motive behind the murders. However, given their recent relationship, the motive may have been jealousy over a man. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Dorothy Stratton. Dorothy Ruth Stratton was born on February 28, 1960, in a neighborhood in Vancouver. Her parents were of Dutch descent and moved to Canada a year after she was born. The Stratton family later expanded with the birth of a son named John, and 7 years later, Dorothy had a younger sister named Louise. Her family lived a simple life. Dorothy was a good student. During her childhood, she did not dream of becoming famous or aspire to have a brilliant career. She only wanted to have the basic things that her poor family could not provide. In 1977, Dorothy started working at a fast food restaurant called Dairy Queen while she was still in high school. At that time, she was 17 years old, with blonde hair, a charming face, and a tall figure that attracted a lot of attention. Not only young boys but also older, wealthy men were drawn to her beauty. One evening before the diner closed, Paul Snyder, a charming young man, walked into Dorothy's workplace. Paul was quickly attracted to the young and attractive Dorothy. After ordering and paying, Paul handed her a large bill. When Dorothy said she couldn't give him the change, Paul laughed and offered her the money on the condition that she go on a date with him immediately. Dorothy agreed. Paul Snyder, 26, was a prominent figure in Vancouver. He managed and scouted models for clubs. He had many friends and connections across Canada. When Paul saw Dorothy, 17, with her blonde hair and charming smile, he immediately recognized her great potential. Paul asked Dorothy out on a date to a fancy restaurant and gave her a red evening gown. She later wore the dress to her high school prom. Paul and Dorothy began their relationship. Although Paul was 9 years older than she was, her parents did not object to their relationship. A few months into their relationship, Paul persuaded Dorothy to participate in a daring photo shoot. She was initially uncomfortable, but Paul convinced her that she had the potential to become a successful model and earn a considerable income. Dorothy eventually agreed to Paul's proposal. Paul found a studio and hired a professional photographer to take pictures of Dorothy. After completing the photo shoot, he sent the photos to the famous Playboy magazine. Dorothy's photos made a strong impression. A Playboy editor invited her to Los Angeles. However, Paul knew that Dorothy's parents would not approve of her working for such a provocative magazine. So he forged Dorothy's mother's signature, claiming that Dorothy's mother had given her permission to sign a contract with the magazine. In the summer of 1979, Paul and Dorothy went to Hollywood. By August, Dorothy had become Playboy's Playmate of the Month and began working as a bunny at the Playboy Club. However, she felt pressured by the attention and was not used to her new role. She also found it unsettling that wealthy men were infatuated with her and spent time with her. Paul Snyder was always by Dorothy's side, always willing to help her. He was in charge of taking care of every aspect of Dorothy's life, from organizing her schedule to signing contracts. However, she also felt completely controlled by Paul. To strengthen their relationship, Paul proposed marriage, and Dorothy finally agreed after some consideration. The reason she accepted the proposal was that she felt she owed him after all that Paul had done for her. In Dorothy's eyes, if it weren't for Paul, she might still be a waitress living off tips. She always felt that if she had never met him, her life would have been boring, working at the diner. However, Dorothy's family had doubts about this decision as they thought that Paul was using Dorothy for profit. Therefore, they warned her against marrying him. In 1979, the same year that Paul proposed, they held a minimalist wedding in Las Vegas. After the simple wedding in 1979, Paul and Dorothy continued to pursue their careers diligently. Dorothy also started filming, where she received recognition from directors not only for her beauty and charm but also for her real acting ability. As Dorothy's fame and fortune grew, she used her earnings to buy a spacious home in Los Angeles, where she lived with her husband. Paul Snyder was pleased with his wife's accomplishments, boasting to friends that Dorothy's growing fame was a shared success. As Dorothy's manager, Paul was always present at her photo shoots and events, overseeing their finances and assets. He also closely monitored her diet, clothing choices, and alcohol consumption at social gatherings, occasionally giving her guidance on which influential people to associate with to advance her career. There was much speculation that Dorothy had an affair with Hugh Hefner, the editor-in-chief of Playboy magazine. However, Hugh denied these claims, insisting that Dorothy was not a woman of loose morals. Over time, Dorothy began to realize that her husband Paul was controlling her life too much. Dorothy appointed a new professional manager and began to exclude her husband from photo shoots, inventing various excuses. The distance between the couple grew, and sensing this, Paul's mental state deteriorated. He became jealously protective of his wife, even hiring a private investigator to monitor her actions. However, no evidence of guilt was ever produced. Paul began to impose restrictions on his wife's clothing, not allowing her to wear provocative clothes and preventing men who did not benefit the family financially from admiring her. He incited conflicts and, in moments of anger, even resorted to physical violence. Dorothy found herself unable to tolerate her husband's aggressive outbursts and increasingly sought to distance herself from him. Friends and colleagues observed growing troubles in Paul and Dorothy's marriage. Playboy staff frequently advised her to end her relationship with her husband. While Dorothy was busy with photo shoots, Paul lived in their home, using his wife's earnings and indulging in idleness. One day, he discovered that Dorothy had set up a company in her name and was actively investing in it. The move, advised by her manager, was strategically arranged so that, in the event of a divorce, Paul Snyder would have no claim to the money. Paul's behavior escalated into more scandal as he sought his influence over his wife diminish. As Dorothy rarely returned home, Paul began to realize that his control over what he considered his golden ticket was slipping away from him. In the spring of 1980, at a gathering at the Playboy Mansion, 20-year-old Dorothy met 40-year-old film director Peter Bogdanovich, a close associate of Hugh Hefner. Peter was charmed by Dorothy and invited her to star in his upcoming comedy. Everyone laughed, and Dorothy accepted the offer to play a mistress. On March 22, Dorothy set off alone to New York to shoot the comedy. She lied to Paul, telling him that the director had forbidden anyone other than the cast and crew from being on the set. In fact, she feared that Paul might cause a disturbance during filming. Furthermore, Dorothy asked her manager to filter calls from her domineering husband while she was on set. In New York, Dorothy found herself infatuated with Peter, and a passionate affair blossomed between the actress and the director. Dorothy exuded joy at being with the new person in her life, not wanting to miss out on the opportunity with a sophisticated, wealthy, and influential director. Her attitude towards her husband became distant and cold. Dorothy spent 2 months in New York, and during this time, Paul was left alone in their large home in Los Angeles. Sometimes Paul brought other women home, who were shocked to discover that Paul was being unfaithful to such a gorgeous wife who was also a Playboy model. In April 1980, Dorothy returned to California to attend the Playboy Awards. She won the prestigious title of Model of the Year and appeared on the cover of the magazine, winning a new award. As part of the recognition, she received a lavish gift from Playboy, a Jaguar sports car, and a cash prize of $200,000. She developed a close friendship with Hugh Hefner, the editor-in-chief, who had high hopes for her. After the ceremony, Dorothy embarked on a 2-week promotional tour across Canada. During the weekend, Dorothy attended a party with director Peter. Meanwhile, she was planning to spend the final part of the tour with her family in Vancouver. However, Paul found out about these plans and immediately traveled to Vancouver, where he had experience managing clubs and numerous connections. During Dorothy's brief break, Paul coerced her into working in clubs and kept all the profits. This period led to a significant conflict between the couple. Dorothy was in tears, contemplating giving up her career to salvage the marriage. She expressed a desire to return to her parents' house with Paul and start a new life. Paul dismissed this idea. After the tour in Canada, Dorothy returned to New York to continue filming while avoiding her husband. At one point, she phoned Paul and requested some space in their relationship. Paul became depressed and angry with Dorothy. At the time, he was having an affair with a girl under the age of 18. The girl looked like a model, and Paul wanted to transform her into the next Playboy bunny. However, he soon realized that his young lover could never surpass his wife. In June 1980, on their first wedding anniversary, Paul received a heart-wrenching letter from Dorothy in which she expressed her desire for a divorce and her intention to stop supporting him financially. This convinced Paul that his fears of Dorothy's infidelity were justified, especially as he suspected she was involved with director Peter Bogdanovich. To gather evidence of his wife's infidelity, Paul hired a private investigator. On one occasion, he called Dorothy's manager and threatened to cause trouble or even do something more serious. The manager advised Dorothy to hire bodyguards and be cautious around Paul. However, Dorothy ignored this advice. Without a green card and lacking permanent residence in the United States, Paul struggled with employment and finances. Facing the risk of running out of money, he withdrew all the funds from his and Dorothy's joint bank account. Consequently, he also sold Dorothy's valuable assets, including collectibles, jewelry, and the Jaguar sports car that Playboy had given her, all at low prices and only for cash. Furthermore, he began renting out rooms in their large house to friends, partly due to depression and loneliness. Gradually, Paul began contemplating a return to his native Canada. In mid-July, filming for the movie in which Dorothy was starring was completed. After that, Dorothy and director Peter Bogdanovich went on a 10-day vacation to England. Upon returning to Los Angeles on July 30th, Dorothy decided to move into the director's mansion in the affluent neighborhood of Bel Air. Meanwhile, Dorothy's ex-husband Paul was plotting his revenge. On the afternoon of July 31st, he borrowed a gun and went to Peter Bogdanovich's house at night. He hid near the gates of the mansion, determined to shoot anyone who came near. After hours of fruitless waiting, Paul became desperate and drove to a mountain area overlooking Los Angeles. During his time alone there, he was plagued by painful thoughts of suicide. When he returned home late at night, Paul still harbored hopes of reconciling with Dorothy. A week later, on August 8th, he convinced Dorothy to meet him at his house. However, Dorothy had changed significantly since their separation. She had become a confident woman with a newfound charm and was no longer affected by Paul's words. Dorothy told Paul that she was in love with another man and wanted a divorce. Paul remained calm and asked her to come back in a week to discuss the breakup amicably. However, the next day, Paul attempted to purchase a gun. He visited several stores but was unable to buy one because he was a Canadian citizen. Paul asks his private investigator to purchase a rifle for self-defense and home security reasons, but the private investigator advises against it and refuses to assist. On August 11th, Paul finds an ad in the newspaper for an old 12-gauge shotgun for sale. He decides to go to the San Fernando Valley to check it out and possibly purchase the shotgun. However, he gets lost and cannot find the address, so he returns without the shotgun. 2 days later, on August 13th, Paul returns to the same location and finds the seller. He purchases the old shotgun and tells the seller that he will use it for hunting. On August 14th, Paul asks his roommate to leave the house so he can talk to his wife, Dorothy, in private without interruption. Dorothy's managers and assistants advised her to accompany them to the meeting or to resolve the issues over the phone. However, Dorothy decided to go alone. She brought a large sum of money to express her gratitude to Paul for his past help. She hoped that the meeting would be peaceful and that she could maintain a friendly relationship with Paul. Dorothy planned to have a short meeting with Paul, so she scheduled a photo shoot for that evening. At noon on August 14th, Dorothy went to meet Paul at his home. Upon arrival, Dorothy received a safety check call from her manager. They had previously set up a specific code for her to use if she encountered any problems. After assuring the manager that everything was fine, the call ended. However, the conversation between Dorothy and Paul gradually became tense and escalated into a dispute. In a sudden fit of rage, Paul pulled out a gun and shot Dorothy in the face. After causing Dorothy's death, Paul seemed to lose control of himself and behaved strangely. He eventually took his own life. At 8 p.m., Dorothy's roommates returned home and found her car parked in front of the house. When they entered the house, they saw Dorothy's handbag in the living room and thought that Paul and Dorothy had made up. They assumed the couple was in the bedroom, so they decided to retreat to their own room and keep quiet. Dorothy's managers became increasingly worried when they could not reach her by phone. They finally managed to contact Paul and Dorothy's roommate at 11 p.m. After a brief conversation, the roommates decided to check out the situation in the master bedroom. When they entered, they witnessed a horrifying sight. Both Dorothy and Paul had died. According to the autopsy, Dorothy Stratton, 20, died about an hour after she arrived home. Dorothy's husband, Paul, died about an hour after his wife's death. Hugh Hefner was one of the first people to be informed of the tragic event. He called his friend Peter Bogdanovich and broke the news of Dorothy's death. When Peter heard that Dorothy had died, he was so shocked that he fainted. He then spent a long time on sedatives to overcome his pain and grief. As a result, Playboy magazine was sent out for publication before the editors knew about it, so the August cover was not changed. Consequently, the magazine was published with a picture of Dorothy Stratton, who had tragically passed away. However, for the annual Playboy issue, her image was replaced with that of another model. Peter Bogdanovich was responsible for organizing and financing Dorothy Stratton's funeral. The loss of his lover had a profound impact on him. He decided to cremate her remains, which were then buried in a Los Angeles cemetery. After the tragic death of the model, the film studio decided not to release They All Laughed, the comedy in which Dorothy had starred. Determined to promote the work, Peter bought the film rights with his own money. The comedy, They All Laughed, was finally released in 1981. Despite his efforts, the film did not receive significant praise and failed to attract much audience attention. This commercial failure cost Peter millions of dollars and eventually led to his bankruptcy. Several years after Dorothy Stratton's death, rumors surfaced that director Peter Bogdanovich had secretly met with Dorothy's younger sister, Louise Stratton, who was then 13 years old. The Stratton family strongly denied these claims and took legal action against the spread of these rumors. However, in 1988, 8 years later, Peter, then 49, actually married Louise Stratton, who was then 20. Louise later stated in interviews that their romance began when she was 18. Peter Bogdanovich and Louise Stratton were married for 13 years, ending in divorce in 2001. Peter never remarried, devoting his life to filmmaking. He died in 2022 at the age of 82. Louise Stratton, who now resides in her hometown of Vancouver, pursued a career as an actress and film director. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Wendy Trapaga. Yolanda Cirillo was born in Miami, Florida. She was a 28-year-old single mother who lived a quiet life away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Yolanda had devoted herself to raising her daughter and being a model mother, giving up the party life. After a while, Yolanda was ready to find stability and a new partner. She began a relationship with Michel Escoto, a man known for his good looks and impeccable grooming. Their relationship, which started out innocent and harmonious, gradually developed into love. Yolanda and Michel met at a computer engineering school, although they had opposite personalities. She was calm and practical, while he was a romantic, adventurous, and gregarious person. Despite their differences, they found each other and began a promising relationship. Michel and Yolanda Cirillo seemed like an unlikely couple. However, after a year of living together, they started building a family. Yolanda, who already had a child from a previous relationship, was very happy to see her boyfriend Escoto loving her daughter. Everything seemed fine, but Michel still had one unfulfilled dream. He wanted to build a successful career and start his own business. Yolanda fully supported Michel's dream because she knew that his success would ensure a stable future for her and her daughter. She also hoped that they would get married and start a family. Michel promised Yolanda that he would give them the dream life they both craved when he achieved financial success. When looking at the most lucrative industries in Miami, Michel realized that there was a great demand for cosmetic services. So he decided to delve into this field. With a basic knowledge of hairdressing, he wanted to learn more about business to open his own salon. His goal was to create a space that was welcoming to everyone. Michel found a beauty school near where he lived and enrolled in February 2002. While studying at this school, Michel found himself different because he was one of the few men in the beauty industry, while he was surrounded by young, dynamic women. These women were very interested in Michel because he was charming and easily won their hearts. This made him popular among the female students. However, despite his relationship with Yolanda, Michel could not resist the charms of Wendy Trapaga, a beautiful 21-year-old girl. He began to flirt with her and often behaved inappropriately around her, but he still did not tell Yolanda about these things. Every night, Michel still returned to Yolanda, maintaining the appearance of a normal family life, but the more time he spent with Wendy, the more he felt guilty towards Yolanda. Wendy Trapaga was different from the women Michel had met before. Wendy was sweet, charming, and had the figure of a model. Wendy was born on April 29, 1981, the daughter of Miriam and Ernest. She grew up in a normal and loving family. Wendy had always been loved by her father, Ernest, who had always made sure that Wendy had grown up in an environment filled with love and respect. Ernest had been a cargo pilot, and his job had required him to travel frequently, which had made Wendy always look forward to his return from each trip. Every time he had returned home, Wendy had been extremely happy and had received a gift from him. March 31, 1988, had been an unforgettable day in Wendy's life, when she had been 16 years old. Wendy's father's plane had exploded at an altitude of 150 feet above the ground and had crashed into a barren land near the runway. This tragedy had taken the lives of all passengers on board. The deep sadness that Wendy had experienced that day had followed her throughout her life. Ernest had been 61 years old when he had passed away, leaving Wendy's mother, Miriam, deeply saddened. After becoming a widow, Miriam had devoted herself to supporting her family and had secured a position as a school administrative assistant. She had worked hard to be able to supervise extracurricular programs at an elementary school in Miami-Dade County. Eventually, Miriam had found love again and had married Juan Bonnets. Wendy had had half-siblings who had warmly accepted her, providing her with the much-needed affection she had been missing since her father's death. During her teenage years, Wendy had developed a strong passion for aesthetics and high fashion. She had possessed a captivating beauty with deep brown eyes, long hair, and a radiant smile, attracting everyone's attention. Despite this, Wendy had remained humble and kind, making those around her admire her even more. After completing her studies, Wendy had gotten married, but unfortunately, this marriage had soon fallen apart. This had motivated her to pursue her passion and learn from her relatives who had run beauty salons. So she had enrolled in Label Beauty Academy in Miami. There, Wendy had met Michel Escoto, a man who could make her smile. Michel's charm and compliments had captivated her. Michel had introduced himself as an executive in the web design industry, with a degree in technology. Perhaps the loss of her father at an early age had made Wendy more sympathetic to older men, considering them safe. However, Michel had not revealed to Wendy that he had a girlfriend, Yolanda. Instead, he had spent more time with Wendy. The feelings between Wendy and Michel had grown deeper and deeper, and they had spent more time together. While Yolanda had thought that Michel was focused on his career, the relationship between Wendy and Michel had naturally turned from emotional to physical. Wendy and Michel had gradually become inseparable. However, Yolanda had felt confused by the changes in her relationship with Michel, even though they had been together for more than 2 years. She had not known that Michel often met other women, one of whom had even sponsored his studies. Initially, Michel had only seen Wendy as a friend, but over time, he had begun to feel deeper feelings for her. He had appreciated the freedom and lack of pressure in his relationship with Wendy. However, Michel had always kept his relationship with Wendy a secret. Even though Michel and Wendy had been entering their second month of a romantic relationship, Michel had hidden it from everyone, which had made Wendy feel confused. Yolanda had also felt that Michel seemed to be growing more distant and their relationship had started to feel more like best friends than lovers. Yolanda had become suspicious of Michel's schedule, and the silence had made the two of them grow more distant. Michel had eventually decided to end his relationship with Yolanda because he had fallen in love with Wendy. In August 2002, Michel and Yolanda had had an argument, and to express his dissatisfaction, Michel had packed his things and left. Yolanda could not believe it. Yolanda had dreamed of a future with Michel, but he had left without giving any explanation. Yolanda had tried to understand her shortcomings and the reason behind his departure. Yolanda had kept calling Michel, but he had not answered. Eventually, Yolanda had deciphered his voicemail password and had discovered messages revealing that he had moved in with another woman named Wendy. Yolanda was shocked to learn of Michel and Wendy's relationship and was furious. Michel and Wendy had moved into a modest apartment in Miami. Unexpectedly, in that small space, the two began a life filled with dreams and satisfaction. Although some of Wendy's family objected to her decision to live with Michel, Wendy's mother, Miriam, was concerned that Michel was almost a decade older than Wendy and, on top of that, he was still unemployed. She wondered if Wendy and Michel had ever shared their jobs or incomes. She was also extremely surprised to find that their house was almost bare, to the point that Wendy and Michel had to sleep on the floor. The most important thing to her was Wendy's happiness. While Wendy was always careful about her finances and kept a tight budget, Michel, on the other hand, was wasteful and unclear about how he earned his money. Miriam simply thought that Michel made money through IT to explain her doubts. Because there were so many questions about Michel, Miriam, and her daughter. Wendy disagreed about Wendy's marriage. Miriam did not agree with Wendy's hasty decision to get married. Ignoring her mother's advice, Wendy and Michel decided to go ahead with the wedding. They planned to hold a wedding ceremony at the City Hall in October 2002, with a simple legal procedure and a not-so-complicated wedding ceremony. When Miriam asked why they got married so quickly, Wendy revealed that she was pregnant. On October 10, 2002, Wendy and Michel exchanged vows at the Miami Beach City Hall. They then planned a simple honeymoon in Key West, Florida. Michel and Wendy left on Friday, October 11th, planning to return Sunday evening. Their 2-day adventure in Key West was filled with fun times. However, on Sunday, Michel and Wendy were reluctant to let their short vacation end. Michel had booked a luxurious suite in a prestigious, romantic hotel. Wendy was thrilled to have their honeymoon extended unexpectedly. Wendy informed her mother of the decision to extend their stay. Wendy's mother, Miriam, was also delighted to hear the news. Although she was concerned about Wendy's health due to her pregnancy, Miriam was happy for her daughter's happiness. Michelle and Wendy envisioned a romantic evening that included dining out, perhaps watching a movie, or dancing the night away at a nightclub. Michelle and Wendy arrived at the hotel close to midnight and spent some time alone together in their room. Little did they know that this would be Wendy's last night on Earth. At around 5:30 a.m. on Monday, Miriam was awakened by a surprise phone call. When she looked at the clock, she felt anxious about such an early call. Miriam picked up the phone feeling even more nervous. It was Michelle on the other end of the line, asking her if Wendy was with her and speaking in a cryptic tone. Michelle explained that they had gone out drinking the night before and Wendy had wanted to stay even though he had been worried about their unborn child. This had led to their first argument in the car on the way home. He had gone back to the apartment alone while leaving her outside. When he had checked back after 5 to 10 minutes, she had disappeared. All attempts to contact her by phone had failed. After her conversation with Michelle, Miriam had agreed to give Wendy some space even though she was extremely worried about where Wendy might be at the moment. She had tried not to panic, but she had known that Wendy did not act that way. At 6 a.m., a sanitation worker walking his routine route through a commercial warehouse complex in the Northwest Dade area had contacted Miami police after noticing something unusual in the parking lot between two cars. As he had gotten closer, he had come across a woman wearing a blue evening gown lying face down in a pool of blood. Forensic experts had been stunned when they had arrived at the scene and had seen blood splattered on a nearby vehicle. An autopsy later revealed that the woman had been struck multiple times with a heavy object, leaving her body disfigured beyond recognition. Although no weapon had been found at the scene, the deceased had been quickly identified as Wendy Trapaga thanks to a driver's license and a wallet containing identifying items found next to her. When Miriam had received the devastating news of her daughter's death, she had been plunged into a deep depression. Tears streaming down her face, Miriam, who had lost her husband, now had to deal with the sudden loss of her daughter. As the detectives had worked to determine the cause of Wendy's death, Miriam had received a call from Wendy's husband, Michelle, asking for any updates on Wendy. Miriam had been speechless and had struggled to convey to Michelle that Wendy was no longer alive. A detective had intervened, taking over the call to inform Michelle that they would be visiting his home to discuss the matter in detail. Michelle had been completely stunned and unable to speak. The police had taken Michelle to the police station to gather more information. During a 14-hour interrogation, Michelle had recounted the events of the evening leading up to Wendy's tragic death. As they had left the hotel and driven home around 3 a.m., Michelle and Wendy had gotten into an argument over drinking. During the argument, Wendy had unexpectedly admitted to Michelle that she was not pregnant, which had added to the tension of the argument. As they had approached their apartment, Michelle had decided to go inside to give them both time to calm down, leaving Wendy in the car. That had been the last time he had seen Wendy. The autopsy report later revealed that Wendy had died from being repeatedly beaten with a blunt object, causing 15 to 20 severe injuries to her face and neck. Her face had been unrecognizable due to the injuries. There had also been signs of strangulation. Investigators had also found strange DNA on Wendy's dress. A physical examination had revealed that Wendy had had alcohol and sedatives in her system. Her estimated time of death had been between 3 and 5 a.m. on October 14th. Some strange points had also been discovered. Wendy had been found without shoes, but her feet had been clean. In addition, there had been no injuries to her hands and feet, suggesting that she might not have resisted during the attack, or that she might have been unconscious or restrained. The medical examiner had also confirmed that Wendy had not been pregnant at the time of her death, raising further questions about the reason behind her lie. Authorities had found a new lead. They had discovered that Michelle had made a phone call at 3:15 a.m. the day his wife had died. Detectives followed up on a crucial lead and discovered that Michelle's last call had been made to his ex-girlfriend, Yolanda. When informed of Wendy's death, Yolanda shared her love story with the police. She admitted to having had deep feelings for Michel and was heartbroken by his sudden passing. Despite attempts to contact him, he remained unresponsive until the fall of 2002, when he returned her call. When questioned, Michel admitted to having had an affair with another woman, but maintained that he had no feelings for Wendy. He said that he still loved Yolanda and hoped to reunite with her. Yolanda, who still loved Michel, trusted him again and hoped that this would rekindle their romance. However, Michel continued to live a double life. The investigation was hampered by the lack of solid evidence, including DNA, fingerprints, surveillance camera footage, or even a murder weapon. All they had were unsubstantiated statements. About 2 months after Wendy's death, Michel re-emerged as a prime suspect in the case. After being caught planning to cash in Wendy's life insurance policy, questions were raised about the true motives of Michel, who was the primary beneficiary of the policy. After this discovery, detectives suspected that Michel had a strong financial motive, seeing as the insurance policy was worth $1 million. The investigation team continued to pursue this theory. On the other hand, an unexpected aspect of Michel's personal history was revealed during the investigation. Michel had previously been arrested and charged with armed robbery. He was also charged with unlawful possession of a firearm and possession of drugs. 3 years after Wendy's death, detectives decided to interview Yolanda again, suspecting that she had more information than she had previously disclosed. After Wendy's death, Michel and Yolanda reunited and moved in together, but their life together was not a happy one. When Yolanda was brought in for questioning, law enforcement officers presented evidence that Yolanda had been the one who had funded Michel and Wendy's vacation after they had married. The police forced Yolanda to reveal the truth by warning her of the consequences of lying. Yolanda gradually opened up to the police. According to her testimony, when Yolanda and Michel resumed their relationship in the fall, Michel told her that he had to marry Wendy because Wendy was pregnant. However, in reality, Michel was indifferent to Wendy and planned to get rid of her to get the $1 million insurance money. Michel and Yolanda's ultimate plan was to kill Wendy and take her huge insurance money. Yolanda was blinded by her love for Michel and decided to go along with Michel's plan. The only thing she cared about was that Michel would reunite with her. According to the following testimony, after failing to get rid of Wendy during the holiday, Michel decided to take drastic action. Michel had laced Wendy's drink with a sedative in their hotel room. When Wendy began to fall asleep, Michel took her outside and put her in the car. In the middle of the night, Michel went to Yolanda's house and asked her to let him use her car. Michel then went to a parking lot far from the residential area in Northwest Dade and asked Yolanda to stay in the car for a while. Yolanda then witnessed Michel returning to her car with blood on his hands and a crowbar. They continued to Biscayne Bay, where Michel removed the murder weapon and washed away the evidence of the crime. Yolanda then drove Michel back to the residence she shared with Wendy, where Michel disposed of his bloody clothes. However, Yolanda's testimony may have been unreliable. Yolanda may have been more directly involved in the murder of Michel's wife. If Michel had not used the crowbar to kill his wife, it was possible that Yolanda herself was responsible for the brutality and disfigurement of Wendy's body. Unfortunately, the truth of this case may have remained unknown due to Yolanda's immunity agreement that protected her from arrest or prosecution. This was used by Michel's attorney to place the blame entirely on Yolanda in order to protect his client. However, after deliberating for just 2.5 hours, the jury convicted Michel Escoto of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison without parole. While Wendy's family finally felt that justice had been served after years of waiting, they were not entirely satisfied that Yolanda Cirillo would continue to walk free. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Kirsten Hatfield. Kirsten Hatfield was born on February 12, 1989, in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Shortly after her birth, Kirsten's father left the family. As a result, Kirsten and her mother, Shannon, moved in with her grandparents, who helped Shannon take care of her. When Kirsten was 2 years old, she and Shannon moved into their own home. Later, Shannon remarried and had a second daughter named Faith. However, this marriage did not last long and ended, leaving Shannon to care for her 2 daughters alone. Despite her young age, Kirsten had to help her mother take care of her younger sister. This responsibility helped Kirsten become more independent and closer to Faith. Kirsten and Faith often slept in the same room, while their mother slept in the next room. On the evening of May 13, 1997, Shannon was getting her children ready for bed. Shannon usually read bedtime stories to her daughters, but since Faith was already asleep, she didn't want to wake her. Instead, Shannon simply said goodnight to Kirsten and went to her bedroom, leaving the girls' door slightly open. She did this every night in case the girls woke up and needed her. At around 3 a.m., Shannon awoke to a noise coming from her daughter's room. Believing her daughters were awake, she went to check on them. However, by the time she reached the bedroom door, the noise had stopped. Assuming the girls had fallen back asleep, she decided not to disturb them. But before she returned to her room, she noticed something strange. The girls' door was completely closed, even though she usually left it slightly open. She wondered if Kirsten or Faith might have closed the door, or if she had forgotten to leave it open. Shannon approached the door, opened it slightly, but did not go in, then returned to sleep. The next morning, around 6:30 a.m., Shannon went to wake her children. Upon entering the bedroom, she found only her youngest daughter, Faith, lying in bed. She woke Faith and asked about Kirsten, but Faith did not know. Shannon searched the house but could not find Kirsten. She looked outside and contacted all her friends whose children were friends with Kirsten, hoping she had gone to visit one of them. However, they all said they had not seen Kirsten. Shannon then called her father, who lived nearby, hoping Kirsten might have come to see him. But he had not seen Kirsten either. Realizing Kirsten had disappeared, Shannon called 911 and the police arrived immediately. Initially, they thought Kirsten might be hiding somewhere in the house or wandering around the town. However, as they began to investigate, it became clear that the situation was more serious. When they checked Kirsten's room, the police found the window slightly open with a few drops of blood on the window frame. Further investigation around the window led them to discover a bloody piece of children's underwear a few feet away. The police asked Shannon to identify the underwear, and she confirmed that it belonged to Kirsten. The investigators realized they might be dealing with a kidnapping and immediately called for additional police support. While searching the area around the house, the police also questioned Shannon. She recounted waking up at 3 a.m. after hearing a noise. It became apparent that an unknown criminal might have kidnapped Kirsten at that time. The police began questioning all the neighborhood residents. However, no one saw or heard anything suspicious that night. The only clue was a neighbor who had been awakened by a dog barking around 3 a.m., coinciding with the time of the kidnapping. With no clear leads, investigators called in a child psychologist to speak with Faith. Despite being only 3 years old, she told them she had witnessed her sister's kidnapping. However, she only said one short sentence: "A bad guy came and took my sister away." This confirmed that Kirsten had not left the house voluntarily, but it still did not provide any specific information about the perpetrator or Kirsten's whereabouts. Detectives were forced to restart the investigation from scratch. They suspected that the kidnapper might be someone Kirsten knew, as there was no sign of a stranger being able to enter Kirsten's room without making a sound. While investigating this hypothesis, the police discovered that Kirsten's mother had a history of drug problems. From there, they began to consider the possibility that the kidnapping was related to this. There were two main theories. First, Kirsten's mother may have owed money to someone in the criminal world, and they decided to capture Kirsten to collect the debt. Second, the police did not rule out the possibility that the mother voluntarily handed Kirsten over to the kidnapper. If the second hypothesis were true, it would explain why the kidnapping was carried out quietly. The police questioned Shannon, but she denied any involvement in the case. She claimed that she had long been drug-free and would never do anything dangerous to her daughter. Although the detectives did not rule out her involvement, they did not find any concrete evidence. Therefore, they decided to seek the public's help through the media, asking people to share any information related to the case. After the media announcement, the police department received hundreds of calls. The detectives followed up on each lead, but most did not yield any useful information. However, they did discover some disturbing clues. A woman called the police, suspecting her boyfriend of being involved in Kirsten Hatfield's kidnapping. He had been acting aggressively and had threatened the woman. When police investigated the man, they discovered some alarming information. He was known to Shannon's brother, which meant that Kirsten may have known him. Furthermore, the house that Kirsten and her mother shared previously belonged to Shannon's brother, leading investigators to believe that the suspect may have been familiar with the layout of the house. The man also had a history of drug and assault charges, which led police to suspect that he may have been involved in the case. The man claimed he had been at a bar the night of the incident. After verifying the information, police found multiple witnesses who confirmed he was at the bar until approximately 4 a.m. This ruled out the possibility that he had kidnapped Kirsten. Investigators then pursued hundreds of other leads, but none led to any results. The case dragged on for months, and the hope of finding Kirsten alive diminished as time went on. Kirsten's mother, Shannon, could not simply sit around and do nothing. From the very beginning, she made every effort to find her daughter. She gave interviews to local media, distributed flyers about Kirsten, and even investigated suspects herself. However, Shannon faced many challenges in her quest to find the truth. For example, she contacted local businesses to ask them to distribute flyers about Kirsten in their offices, stores, and facilities. Many businesses refused, saying it was not in line with company policy. Shannon tried to arrange a meeting with the state governor but was unsuccessful. She also set up a small center to attract volunteers to help with Kirsten's case. The center focused on distributing flyers and communicating with the media. However, Shannon encountered some difficult problems, including volunteers stealing money and using the media to gain attention. Nevertheless, she persisted and did not give up in her search for the truth. After years of trying, Shannon realized that her current approach was not working. So she decided to change direction. She enrolled in college, earned a degree in criminology, and became a probation officer. Her goal was not only to find her daughter's kidnapper but also to protect the community from criminals who could pose a threat. She believed that Kirsten's kidnapper may have had other criminal records and wanted to prevent them from committing further crimes. While investigating her daughter's disappearance, Shannon delved into the history of violence in the town and surrounding areas to find any connection to the abduction. However, all her efforts yielded no positive results. Shannon was faced with the fact that Kirsten might not be alive anymore and that she might never be able to bring her back. Despite this, she never gave up on finding answers. The police reopened the case several times to look into new leads, but to no avail. They worked with the FBI to create a physical sketch of Kirsten years after the abduction. However, no one thought Kirsten was still alive, but without any remains, they could not confirm this with certainty. The case seemed to have stalled for years until a major breakthrough in 2014. A woman contacted the police with a strange story. While sorting through her grandmother's inheritance, the woman found a diary. The diary revealed that the woman's son had confessed to killing Kirsten Hatfield. The story contained enough detail that detectives were convinced it was true. According to the diary, the man kidnapped Kirsten from her bedroom and took her to a house he owned in a nearby town. There, he brutally abused Kirsten and murdered her. The process was recorded in many pages of the diary, which sent shivers down the spines of even experienced investigators. The diary also revealed that the entire incident was videotaped. When the police questioned the woman's son, they expected him to deny any involvement in the crime. However, his words surprised them. He claimed to have no involvement in the crime but knew who the killer was because Kirsten had been murdered in his ex-girlfriend's house. This left the police baffled, and they had to ask him for the address of the house. Detectives quickly obtained a warrant and sent a team to thoroughly inspect the house. They began by spraying luminol, a substance that glows when it comes into contact with the smallest traces of blood, even if the blood has been wiped from the crime scene. When the forensic experts did this, they were shocked. One of them later said that the entire house lit up like a Christmas tree. The experts discovered traces of blood everywhere in the house, and especially that the blood stains matched the description of the murder in the diary. To gather more evidence, they removed the floorboards, cut up the wallpaper, and sent it all to the lab. They also excavated the property to search for the victim's remains. The police also found a box containing hundreds of videotapes in the house, which reminded them of the diary. They suspected that one of the tapes might contain footage of the victim's abuse. Detectives examined each tape carefully but found no evidence of the murder. Excavations on the property were also fruitless. No remains or other evidence were found. However, the police still believed they had discovered the truth behind Kirsten's disappearance. The case was solved, but the pain and suffering of Kirsten's family will never be completely healed. Detectives faced an unexpected turn when analyzing the blood stains left in Kirsten's home. The results showed that the blood was not human but that of an animal. This shocked the police because they thought they were close to solving the case. Instead, they were faced with another false clue. It is unclear exactly what the clue was, but it is possible that someone played a prank on the police or that the diary was written by a mentally ill person who saw the kidnapping on the news and believed that a story would spring to mind. However, the detectives continued to hope to uncover the truth. But no new clues emerged and the case went cold again. In the summer of 2015, the case was handed over to Detective Daryl Miller. He decided to start a new investigation and studied all the existing documents and records. During this process, he discovered something strange. Daryl found that his predecessors had overlooked key evidence: blood stains on the windowsill in Kirsten's room and on her underwear. This evidence had been in storage for a long time for unknown reasons. The police apparently did not think that analyzing it would yield any useful results, as they believed the blood might belong to the victim. However, Daryl decided to send the evidence to the lab for analysis. And it yielded a big surprise. The lab results showed that neither of the blood samples belonged to Kirsten, but instead to an unknown man. This was a major breakthrough in the case, but also posed a new challenge for Daryl. The kidnapper's DNA sample had been uploaded to the FBI database, but there were no matches. This could mean that the kidnapper had not committed any serious crimes in the past, or that the crime had occurred before the database was created. Daryl decided to collect DNA samples from all the men involved in the case since the kidnapping. The police made a list, located each person, and sent their DNA to the lab. Surprisingly, each individual was willing to provide a DNA sample immediately. This led investigators to suspect that the killer might not be on the list of suspects. Daryl waited patiently for the results, and eventually, he received a call from the lab. Experts analyzed a sample and found that it was an exact match to the blood on the windowsill and on the victim's underwear. This person was Anthony Palma, a 56-year-old neighbor of the Hatfield family. Anthony was one of the first people the police spoke to after the kidnapping. At the time, he said he had been awakened at 3 a.m. by the sound of a dog barking. Now, after confirming his involvement, detectives decided to question him again. Although the DNA evidence was sufficient to convict him, investigators still wanted him to confess. This would expedite the trial and help them find Kirsten's remains. Since he was the only one who knew where the remains were, locating them would be difficult without his cooperation. The detectives took a cautious approach. They brought Anthony in for questioning, saying it was merely a formality to gather new information. In fact, they wanted him to admit whether he had ever been to the Hatfields' house. When asked if he remembered anything else from that night, Anthony told the same story he had told 18 years earlier, but this time he added a new detail. He said he had seen a white car parked in front of Kirsten's house. But he didn't pay much attention to it. Next, the police wanted to know more about his relationship with Kirsten and her family. Anthony explained that although he lived next door, he had never spoken to Kirsten directly. He stated he was close to other kids in the neighborhood and that they would occasionally come by for candy or help repairing their bikes. The police then continued to question Anthony, asking if he had ever been to Kirsten's house, whether to help the family or just to chat. But Anthony insisted that he had never been to her house. This statement raised suspicion among the police. While investigating the crime scene, they had discovered his blood on the windowsill of Kirsten's room. By checking his previous statements, the police realized that Anthony had lied. However, there was one important problem. The house where Kirsten had lived belonged to Anthony's friend, and he admitted to having visited the house in the past. However, the blood on the windowsill was very fresh and could not have been there many years before the murder. The detective decided to present the critical information and informed him that his blood had been found in Kirsten's room and on her underwear. Anthony completely denied this and repeated that he had never been in their home. The investigators tried to get him to confess, but he continued to deny it. The detective decided to change the method of questioning and left the room. Detective Darrell was asked to step in and talk to Anthony. Bringing a photo of Kirsten, the detective placed it on the table in front of the suspect. Anthony immediately pushed the photo away and tried to avoid looking at it for the rest of the conversation. Darrell asked Anthony a variety of questions, hoping that he would make a mistake and confess to the crime. However, Anthony continued to deny everything. Realizing that they would not be able to extract a confession, the police decided to end the interrogation and arrest him. They then obtained a search warrant for the house and excavated the surrounding area but found no trace of Kirsten's remains or any other evidence. During the trial, Anthony consistently denied his involvement. However, DNA analysis revealed the truth in court. Additional details emerged, showing that the police had overlooked some important information during the initial investigation. Anthony had a criminal record, including breaking into another girl's bedroom and assaulting her. He had also been incarcerated in the 1980s for an assault involving a weapon. This information further highlighted Anthony's dangerous criminal status. However, for some reason, his previous convictions were overturned in 1997. In late 2017, a jury found him guilty of kidnapping and murdering Kirsten, sentencing him to life in prison. Throughout the trial, he never revealed the location of Kirsten's remains, and the police doubted they would ever find her. The biggest problem in finding Kirsten's body was related to where Anthony was known to operate. As a park ranger, he was familiar with remote areas and might have chosen a hard-to-reach place to bury the body. Nevertheless, Kirsten's mother, Shannon, persisted in her search for her daughter. Shannon kept in touch with Anthony while he was in prison, hoping to find clues about Kirsten's whereabouts. During each meeting, Shannon felt Anthony was slowly revealing information, but he ultimately remained silent. In 2019, Anthony was killed by a fellow inmate over a personal grudge related to his crimes against a child, leaving Kirsten's family almost without hope of finding her body. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Callie Ann Poulton. Callie Ann Poulton was born on September 20th, 1989, in Rochester, New York. She was the only child in her family, and Callie's parents gave her all their attention and love. When Callie was 3 years old, her parents decided to divorce and Callie lived with her mother. Her father maintained a good relationship with his ex-wife and visited Callie often. Callie's mother, Judy, moved to an apartment complex in the quiet area suburb of Rochester. Although Judy's ex-husband helped take care of Callie, she still had financial difficulties. When Callie was 4 years old, Judy found a part-time job to save money for a trip to Disney World with Callie the following summer. Judy's job was to deliver magazines to customers in her neighborhood. On the evening of May 23, 1994, Judy was getting ready for her job. Judy was sitting at home, putting flyers in the magazine before going out to socialize. At that time, Callie asked permission to go for a walk because she wanted to ride her tricycle on a beautiful evening. Judy looked outside and saw many other children playing in the yard, so Judy agreed to let her daughter go outside for a few minutes. However, when Judy finished getting ready and went outside to call Callie home, she could not find Callie there. Judy looked around but could not find Callie. She searched the yard and her body but could not find her daughter. She also could not hear Callie's tricycle, although it often made a clear noise. As time passed, Judy's worry increased and she began asking neighbors if they had seen Callie. Some reported seeing Callie playing with her friends in the yard, but did not know where she went after that. When the neighbors learned that Callie was missing, they joined in the search but were unable to find Callie or her bicycle. Judy believed that her daughter could not have gone anywhere on her own because she had taught Callie to only ride her bike in their yard. Callie had never told her mother and Callie's little bike could not take her far. Judy also thought that if Callie went out of the yard, she would be discovered immediately. Fearing the worst, Judy decided to contact the police for assistance. Within minutes, the police arrived at the scene and began an urgent search. Firefighters and canine units soon joined the search. The police conducted a house-to-house search and searched the surrounding area. They believed that Callie was still somewhere in the area. Since the kidnapping was a possibility, the police suspected that the kidnappers might be residents of the complex. The reason is that the area has quite strict security controls, so it is unlikely that a stranger would enter the area and snatch Callie out of the yard without anyone noticing. The complex has a total of 300 apartments, and the residents are willing to cooperate with the police, opening their doors for them to search. In case no one is home, the complex manager will provide a spare key for the lock so that the police can check. However, all these efforts do not bring the desired results. No apartment has ever found Callie or her bicycle. The search continued throughout the night and around 4 a.m., the mission was reclassified as a kidnapping. A special police unit took over the project, and the undercovers asked Judy if there was anyone in their lives who might want to harm them. When the police asked about someone who might be involved in Callie's disappearance, Judy quickly met a man in the apartment complex that made her suspicious. The man, Mark, 22 years old, had just moved in with his wife and 1.5-year-old son. During the conversation with Mark, Judy felt that his actions were very strange. During a conversation, Mark said that Judy's daughter was very beautiful, but his tone of voice made Judy feel uncomfortable. What was more worrying was when Mark said that he had seen all the girls in the apartment complex and thought Callie was the prettiest. Mark once asked Judy a very surprising question. He wanted to know if Callie would talk to Judy if someone tried to touch Callie. Judy answered yes and immediately left the yard. Before that, Callie liked to play with Mark on the playground, but since that conversation, Judy has not let her daughter near him, even when she is present. During the conversation with the secrets, Judy recalled another detail. After she went out to look for Callie, she saw Mark walking out to the playground with his son. She asked him if he had seen Callie, and Mark said no. Judy also noticed something strange, that Mark's sneakers were missing their shoelaces, but she did not pay much attention to it at the time. The police decided to mark the matter and took him to the headquarters to determine some issues. Mark denied any involvement in Callie's disappearance and agreed to take a lie detector test. The test results showed that Mark answered truthfully, so he was released. In addition, Judy accidentally provided an alibi for Mark when she saw him playing with her son on the playground at the exact time she was looking for Callie. The police went to Mark's apartment early in the investigation but did not find Callie or Callie's bike. After eliminating Mark as a suspect, the undercover police continued their investigation. They began to investigate Judy to see if she was involved in Callie's disappearance. Judy understood that this was part of the investigation process and answered all of their questions honestly. Callie's disappearance attracted public attention when information about the incident was broadcast on local newspapers and posted on billboards all over the city. The alert received many calls with information, but after a thorough investigation, all of them turned up nothing. However, Judy did not give up and continued to search for Callie. Judy devoted all her time and energy to finding Callie. She contacted the media and did everything she could to find Callie. Some compassionate people have also come forward to help her, not only helping to distribute flyers but also raising a $100,000 reward for any useful information about Callie's disappearance. Judy was invited to appear on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Callie's disappearance was featured on a popular television show about unsolved cases. The police investigated the case for 2 years without success. Although they gathered some clues, nothing helped them find a solution. On August 9, 1996, when a woman called the police and told them about a serious argument between her and her husband. During the call, the woman said she was tired of her husband's strange behavior and wanted a divorce. The man tried to convince her not to do so, and told her about the difficulties he was facing. Suddenly, the man confessed a terrible secret: he had killed Callie. The woman was shocked and took her child to her father's house immediately. She then called 911 and revealed her husband's name as Mark Christie, who was also Judy's neighbor. The detectives were surprised to hear her story, but they soon encountered a serious problem. Under state law, any information shared between spouses is protected and cannot be used as evidence in court. This means that even if Mark tells the truth, the police cannot arrest or question him. Furthermore, the police recalled that Mark's apartment was searched in the early hours of the investigation, and he was in the yard with his child shortly after Callie went missing. This led the police to suspect that Mark did not have enough time to kidnap and kill Callie. After listening to Mark's wife's story, Detective Crow decided to find out more information. Through the investigation, Crow discovered that Mark and his family had moved out of the apartment complex just weeks after Callie went missing. Because the parents of the 2 girls accused Mark of standing naked in front of their house in full view. However, no formal investigation was conducted into this, because by law, Mark was standing in his own home. However, Mark's actions have raised considerable suspicion in the detective's mind. When Detective Crow visits Mark in another city 50 miles from Rochester, he is stopped by Mark's mother. She refuses to allow the detective to see Mark and demands the presence of a lawyer. Mark's mother states that her son will not answer any questions without his lawyer present. Mark seems to know about his wife's report to the police, and Detective Crow realizes that there is little he can do in this situation. Mark's confession to his wife cannot be used as evidence in court. However, Detective Crow is not giving up yet. While talking to Mark's mother, he convinces Mark to agree to answer some questions about Callie's case. Crow suggests that they go to a nearby restaurant and chat over coffee. Mark agrees, but only if Crow takes him to see his lawyer afterward. They stop at a nearby Italian restaurant. During this time, Detective Crow chatted with Mark in a friendly manner, trying not to pressure him. The tactic worked, and Mark began to speak. He expressed remorse for what he had done to Callie, saying that his actions had haunted him for the past 2 years. According to Crow, Mark kept seeing Callie's picture in newspapers and flyers, and her face seemed to follow him everywhere. To avoid scaring Mark, Crow approached the conversation cautiously. Although he had known Mark since the early days of the investigation, this was not their first conversation. Crow told Mark that he had fooled the entire police team. Mark responded that he did not want to boast, but the way he had disposed of the bike was very clever. Mark asked Crow if he wanted to know the details, but he warned that he would only talk about the bike and not reveal any more information. Crow tried to keep his tone light and friendly to avoid scaring Mark and gather as much information as possible. Mark wanted Crow to know that Callie's tricycle had been stored in his apartment for 3 days since Callie had gone missing. Mark knew that the police would search all apartments without a warrant because it was protocol when a child was in danger. Mark quickly decided to disassemble the bike into small parts and hide them in hard-to-find places in the apartment. Mark carefully hid some of the parts in his clothes and put them in the closet, while the other parts were put in small bags and hidden in his car. Mark then slowly disposed of these bags, storing them in places far from the apartment. During this time, the police were stationed at the exit of the apartment complex, checking each bike. Since they were only looking for Callie, these small bags did not attract their attention. Detective Crow sees an opportunity to get a full confession from Mark. So he begins to tell Mark that Callie's death may not have been his fault, but a tragic accident. Mark asks what sentence he could face, and Crow suggests that it could be around 25 years. Mark argues that it would be unfair for him to spend half his life behind bars, away from his wife and son. He also says that he has been living with his own personal grief for the past 2 years, and that should be taken into account when making a decision. Although these words may seem like an excuse, Crow continues his tactics. He advises Mark to ease his grief and tell what really happened. Mark says that he is willing to confess everything, but only after talking to a lawyer. Crow understands that the lawyer will not allow Mark to confess to the crime without evidence against him. So Crow told Mark that if he did not tell the truth, Callie's parents would never know what happened to Callie, or whether Callie suffered before she died. Mark replied, "Callie did not suffer." Crow felt that Mark was ready to confess, so he advised Mark to do the right thing for himself, his family, and God. Upon hearing this, Mark looked at Crow and finally admitted his crime. He reiterated that Callie did not suffer and confessed that he had strangled Callie. Mark added to his story that he had not done anything bad to Callie. However, Mark said that that evening, Callie came to his apartment and wanted to play with her 1.5-year-old son. Since he knew that Callie's mother would not agree to her coming to his house, Mark decided to keep quiet about it. When Callie entered the apartment, Callie went upstairs and went into the room to play with Mark's child. After about 10 minutes, Mark heard Callie's mother calling her name in the yard and became worried. Mark feared that Callie's mother would be angry that he had allowed her into the house without permission. Mark decided to go up to the and strangle Callie with his bare hands. Detective Crow questioned the accuracy of this story. It seemed that Mark had intended to lure Callie into his apartment by taking advantage of his wife's absence, and the excuse of playing with his son may have been just an excuse. There, Mark may have approached Callie, and when he heard Judy calling Callie's name, he feared that Callie would reveal what had just happened. In addition, Crow also recalled the detail that Judy had seen him wearing sneakers without laces, which he could have used as a deadly instrument. This means that the crime was not spontaneous, but planned by Mark. Mark tried to minimize the severity of his crime by changing some details in the story. But Detective Crow understood that if he spoke out his suspicions, Mark might change his mind and refuse to talk about what he did to Callie. So Detective Crow continued to act and listen to the story. Mark claimed that after the murder, he carried Callie's body into the kitchen and left her on the floor. He then took his son outside to create an alibi for himself in order to divert the police's suspicions. Mark knew that Judy was calling his daughter's name in the yard. In order not to arouse suspicion, Mark wanted Judy to see him. Mark then returned home and placed the laundry basket on top of Callie's body, covering it with clothes. After a few minutes, he put the basket in the trunk of his car and took his son to work. At that time, many people were searching for Callie and no one paid attention to Mark. When he arrived at the company, Mark parked his car and left the laundry basket at the back door of the building. Then he drove forward, then Mark turned back and lied to his co-workers that he had forgotten something at work to cover up his actions. Then Mark climbed onto a tank of liquid coolant and dropped Callie in, before tying a heavy metal object to Callie. Then Mark threw away Callie's clothes, but did not remove Callie earrings. Finally, Mark returned home and joined the search for Callie with other neighbors. Mark took Callie's body out of his workplace before the police arrived to investigate. When confessing his crime, Mark said that killing Callie was a big mistake. After providing the necessary information to Detective Crow, Mark paid for the meal and left a $2 tip. He then accompanied the detective to the police station and was arrested for murder. Mark's attorney attempted to withdraw his confession, but was unsuccessful. Since Mark had volunteered the information, Detective Crow had not broken any laws. Mark's confession was still admissible. The police went to Mark's workplace and opened the box containing Callie's body. 2 years after Mark killed Callie, Callie's body was still in the box. Due to the high level of decomposition, experts were unable to determine the cause of death or any other details. They were only able to confirm the victim's identity, and Callie's family was finally able to bury Callie. Mark pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison. Mark's lawyer had previously negotiated a deal that would see the kidnapping charges dropped and Mark would face only the murder charge. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Marie Robards. Stephen Robards and Beth Burrows grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. Stephen, whose father owned a small insurance agency, was a well-known figure at school. Beth, a talented athlete in track and field, volleyball, and basketball. Stephen and Beth fell in love in high school and married in 1972. When Beth turned 18, shortly after her boyfriend signed a 4-year contract to serve in the Navy on July 10th, they welcomed daughter, Marie, that same year. Because of Stephen's military service, the family moved frequently between different naval bases. This lifestyle was challenging for Beth. After Stephen completed his service, they returned to Fort Worth. Beth often criticized her husband and described their relationship as a teenage romance, but over time, the love faded and the daily challenges made things worse. Additionally, Stephen's temper and jealousy added to the strain on their relationship, causing Beth to file for divorce in 1979. Marie Robards, their daughter, was a well-behaved student who excelled in her studies. She played the clarinet in the school orchestra and took art and dance lessons during after-school activities. Because her father was in the military, they moved frequently, which made it challenging for Marie to constantly change schools and friends at first. However, she gradually adjusted and became more open and sociable with her new classmates and teachers. After her parents divorced, Marie and her mother, Beth, relocated to a nearby city, while her father stayed in their previous home. Stephen lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in Fort Worth, and Marie, along with Beth, visited him no more than twice a month. In the 1980s, Beth began a relationship with Frank Rouse, a former Navy officer she met while her husband was stationed in Florida. At first, they were just chatting, but after Beth's divorce, they developed a relationship and decided to live together. After leaving the Navy, Frank became a police officer in a small Texas town about an hour outside of Fort Worth, with a population of about 10,000. Frank had also recently gone through a divorce and had full custody of his son, the same age as Beth's daughter, Marie. In 1981, Beth married Frank, but their marriage soon hit a rough patch. Beth had to work, so she spent little time with her husband and children, making it difficult for them to bond. This problem remained unresolved and became more serious when Marie turned 16. One day, she came home to find Frank in bed with another woman. Marie was furious and told her mother immediately, but instead of ending the relationship, Beth remained calm. During this time, Beth worked in the emergency room at a local hospital, which kept her away from home for long hours. As a result, she rarely saw Frank and did not spend much time with her daughter. Beth did not blame Frank for their distance. Instead, she felt responsible because she believed she should have spent more time with him. However, Marie was frustrated and thought that Frank was not good enough for her mother, urging Beth to divorce him. Beth, on the other hand, wanted to handle her own relationships and asked Marie not to interfere. As she grew older, Marie began to distance herself from her family. She often argued with Frank and pointed out his shortcomings. Eventually, Beth had to choose between Marie and Frank. Marie declared that if Beth did not divorce him, she would leave the house. Beth disagreed with her daughter's wishes. Even though Marie started packing, Beth didn't change her mind. She decided that Marie should stay with her maternal relatives in Fort Worth instead of going to her biological father's house. Beth contacted these relatives, who assisted Marie in enrolling in a new school. Marie moved, but after only 5 days in Fort Worth, she had spent all her money and wanted to return home to her mother. At this time, Frank's son chose to live with his biological mother, but soon became unhappy and wanted to return. However, Frank refused to let him return. Now, Marie was faced with a similar situation, and she was not allowed to return home either. The rule that if someone left home, they could not return, created a lot of tension. Beth felt that Frank was forcing her to choose between him and Marie. Many people supported Frank's stance, believing that children should not have a back-and-forth relationship with their parents, as this led to conflict and problems. Frank was steadfast in his beliefs and wanted to prevent such problems. He thought he was promoting discipline and trying to avoid constant chaos and tension. It is important to note that Frank was a former military man, known for his decisiveness and discipline. Marie had to accept the situation. At this point, she had lost respect for Frank because of his affair, but after recent events, she had come to hate Frank. Marie left Fort Worth and moved into a rented apartment. Meanwhile, Beth tried to convince her husband to let them reunite. She believed that this was just a temporary situation and that Marie would return soon. Unfortunately, despite her efforts, Frank was unyielding and never allowed Marie back. Beth felt trapped in this situation. The strain on their relationship led her to seek help from a psychologist. Marie then decided to move back in with her father, Stephen. Marie's decision to return seemed to stem from desperation. Stephen was happy to have his daughter back. At the time, he was living alone and struggling with depression. He later found work as a mailman and became romantically involved with Sandra Hudgens, who lived in the same apartment complex as him. During this time, they lived in a small, cramped one-room apartment. Marie slept on a cot in the kitchen. Steve realized that his daughter was struggling, so he tried to cheer her up. He took her to the movies and outings regularly. However, Sandra felt that these efforts did not make much of a difference. Marie's academic performance declined, and she frequently called Beth. asking to come home. She missed her mother's love and attention. Marie was unhappy with her father's cooking and cleaning and sometimes cried on the phone, begging to come home. She expressed her dislike of the new school and complained about her father's small living space. Marie is confused as to why her mother favors Frank over her and feels that her mother will not stand up to him. Beth, her mother, explained that she felt helpless because her husband would not let her visit Marie. Marie eventually began to write in her diary about her thoughts of ending her life. When her father found out about this, he was very worried and immediately informed Beth. It turns out Marie exaggerated her emotions to get attention. As the months passed, things stabilized. Marie seemed to be adjusting. Her grades improved significantly. She was able to connect with her classmates and everything seemed to be back to normal. Marie's emotions stabilized as well. She had completely adapted to her new environment. According to Sandra, Marie never had any conflicts with her father, was respectful to him and remained calm. Stephen did his best to support her. However, behind Marie's calm exterior, there was something darker. After 3 years, Marie moved back in with her father. On February 18th, Stephen ordered Mexican food for dinner. After the meal, he planned to attend a church service. About an hour later, Stephen returned to his apartment complex, complaining of severe stomach pain and feeling very unwell. Maria, along with Sandra, went to check on him after hearing that he was unwell. When they arrived, Stephen was in pain, shaking, foaming at the mouth, and having difficulty breathing. The ambulance arrived shortly after, but it was too late. They tried to insert a breathing tube, but his airway had closed. Stephen was rushed to the hospital, but he died on the way. Maria was in shock, staring at her father and trying to hide her emotions from Sandra. She had no idea what had really happened because Stephen's death was not an accident. Hours after the incident, Frank and Beth learned that Stephen was dead. They had to take Marie home, something she had wanted for a long time. After an autopsy, the medical examiner concluded that Stephen had died of a heart attack, identifying symptoms such as chest pain, nausea, and difficulty breathing. The case seemed straightforward and that Stephen's death was due to a heart attack. He did not perform toxicology tests. Even if they wanted to run those tests, the lab didn't have the equipment needed to detect the poison in Stephen's blood. After the burial, Maria stayed by her father's grave, remaining in shock even after everyone else had left. Following the funeral, her mother Beth approached her, visibly upset, and shared her plans to break up with Frank and move to Panama City, Florida, with Maria. However, Maria began to have difficulty breathing and panic, and it took her a long time to calm down. Beth believed that Maria's grief was due to the death of her father Stephen, unaware of the deeper issues at play. Marie and Beth then moved to Panama City. Beth found a job as a clerk at the Department of Motor Vehicles and enrolled her daughter in school. Things seemed to improve, but Marie continued to struggle with depression. Her mother suspected that this was related to her father's death. Beth blamed herself for what had happened. As a high school senior, Marie saw a psychologist who diagnosed her with major depression. Marie's mother recalled the serious problems Stephen had faced and was concerned that his mental health problems might be affecting Marie. To help Marie cope with her depression, she sought the help of a psychiatrist. Things changed when Frank came to Panama City hoping to reconcile with Beth, believing that he needed to devote more time to their marriage and change his attitude towards raising their children. Surprisingly, Beth forgave her unfaithful husband once again. Marie was surprised by her mother's decision. She expressed her unwillingness to live with Frank, who had been unfaithful to Beth, and said that she missed Texas and wanted to live with her mother without any men. However, Beth decided to move in with Frank. In response, Marie contacted her grandfather, Jim, and asked if she could live with him in Mansfield. The family agreed, and Marie moved in with her grandfather. Marie became an outstanding granddaughter, an excellent student, and very polite. She was deeply engaged in the lives of her family and friends. Marie continued to pursue her passion for art and showed interest in journalism. She was intelligent and attractive, yet she dressed simply and never acted impulsively. She always returned home on time, didn't drink at parties, and avoided dating, even though many boys showed interest in her. Eventually, Marie formed a friendship with one of the most popular girls at school, Stacy. Stacy believed that Marie had gone through something traumatic, though she could not fathom how severe it truly was. In January 1994, Marie and Stacy spent the night together, studying Shakespeare's Hamlet. As Stacy read the part about poisoning, Marie suddenly looked pale and unwell. Concerned, Stacy asked her what was wrong. At first, she thought Marie might be upset about the possibility of pregnancy, but Marie denied it. Stacy then asked Marie if she had crashed her grandfather's car, but she shook her head in response. Stacy joked, "You didn't kill anyone, did you?" Marie became quiet and then asked an unusual question. She wanted to know how her friend felt about such events happening in real life. Stacy paused to think. Marie attempted to stand up from the couch but quickly collapsed back in tears, confessing that she had poisoned her father. Overwhelmed by her emotions, she could no longer contain her guilt. The Marie then recounted the story of the murder. She explained that in early February 1993, during a chemistry class, she had poured a substance from a bottle into a napkin, which she later put in her backpack. That evening, she added a bit of poison to her father's meal, and subsequently she endured a long struggle with guilt over her actions. After Marie confessed, she pleaded with Stacy to keep it a secret. Marie had only shared this information with Stacy. She revealed that she had access to a deadly poison that is nearly impossible to detect. This poison can quickly cause a heart attack, leading to death that appears natural. However, Marie claimed she was unaware of its lethal potential at the time. She only wanted her father to become ill so that her mother would care for her. Stacy eventually told her mother everything, and they were both shocked. The mother contacted the Poison Control Center to inquire if the substance could be fatal. The lab technicians sensed something was off and declined to provide an answer. The mother then hung up the phone. Marie felt lost and unsure of what to do. At first, she kept it a secret. She struggled with her feelings for a long time but eventually convinced herself that it was just a cruel prank. Stacy suggested that Marie talk to a psychologist or a priest to share her feelings. However, things did not improve. In February 1994, on the first anniversary of Stephen's death, Jim took Marie and her friend Stacy out to dinner. As Jim raised a glass in remembrance, both girls burst into tears. For several weeks, Stacy was tormented by feelings of guilt and nightmares until she finally decided to reach out to the school counselor and confided in her friend. Although it sounded strange, her friend took the matter seriously and contacted the police, hoping to find answers. The police lab did not have the necessary equipment to investigate the results, making everything futile. Stacy also began to distance herself from Marie. She wanted to avoid all contact with Marie. Their friendship eventually fell apart. Meanwhile, Marie believed that everything had been forgotten, unaware that there was an investigation going on. In October 1994, a Fort Worth police officer contacted Stacy, saying that the toxicology results were back. They revealed that Stephen Robards had indeed been poisoned. He had received a dose 250 times higher than the fatal dose, suggesting that it was premeditated murder. Marie was arrested while studying at the University of Texas at Austin, where many people considered her sweet and harmless. She confessed immediately. Marie said that she never intended to kill her father. She just wanted to make him sick so she could reunite with her mother. Unfortunately, she miscalculated the dose and accidentally caused Stephen's death. Many people found it hard to believe that Marie could have done such an act, and some even blamed her mother for the situation. They believed that her mother's abandonment had caused Marie distress. They felt that Marie was not supposed to be with her mother, which caused her to take drastic actions to get her attention. Marie first appeared in court for a preliminary hearing on October 28, 1994, but she was released on bail and placed in the custody of her mother. A major issue now is whether Marie should be treated as a minor or an adult. Since she was 17 at the time of poisoning her father and is legally considered a minor. On March 30, 1995, Marie Robards was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. It was decided that she would be tried as an adult. Her mother posted $10,000 bail, allowing Marie to move back in with Frank and Beth while she awaited her trial. She was 19 at the time. Marie's mother used the money Marie received from Stephen's life insurance policy, totaling $60,000, to hire two experienced attorneys from Fort Worth. Their defense strategy was based on the argument that Marie wanted her father sick, but did not intend to kill him. Her goal was simply to get back to her mother. The prosecutor's office argued that the actions were motivated by malicious intent, particularly due to the insurance money that Marie received. In this case, the prosecution suggested pressing charges for first-degree murder. Testifying for the prosecution was Marie's best friend, Stacy, who provided details about the emotional state of the Marie. The defense called a psychiatrist to testify, who stated that Marie was not a cold-blooded killer and was merely suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder due to guilt over killing her father. Throughout the hearing, Marie sat silently, often covering her face and crying. Although Marie expressed remorse and expressed her love for her father, the prosecutor claimed that her feelings were not genuine. The prosecution argued that the poisoning showed premeditated murder, arguing that a stomachache alone did not justify returning to her mother. Instead, it implied a desire to kill. At the time, a friend of Marie's mentioned that Marie was considering various ways to reunite with her mother. Marie thought that if she burned down her father's apartment, her mother would come get her. However, no one took Marie seriously. Everyone believed that she was joking. Beth felt guilty about the situation. During the trial, she expressed that if she had left Frank sooner and moved to Florida with Marie, this tragedy could have been avoided. Marie's grandfather, Jim, pleaded for mercy for his granddaughter, asserting that she could not have killed the man she loved. The prosecutor asked for a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 35 years. It is possible that the pleas of family members for a lighter sentence, combined with Marie's emotional expression, influenced the decision. Marie Robards was ultimately sentenced to 28 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 7 years. After the verdict, the lawyers immediately appealed, arguing that the prosecution had presented insufficient evidence about Marie's mental state. However, in 1998, the appeal was denied and she was sent to prison. In a conversation with her mother, Marie expressed that she did not want Stacy to feel guilty about the events that had occurred. Marie believed that Stacy's actions were justified. Marie ultimately served 8 years in prison before being released in 2003. She had since married and changed her name. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Bradley Robert Edwards. The city of Claremont is currently facing a crisis due to a serial killer targeting women, causing fear even among local street dogs. A man, around 50 years old and noticeably out of shape, entered the courtroom. After a long time, one trait remained unchanged: his ability to conceal his emotions. His name is Bradley Robert Edwards. And yet, people preferred his newspaper nickname much more: the Killer from Claremont. Edwards is a wealthy suburb of Perth, the capital of Western Australia. The community lived in fear after at least 3 girls vanished without a trace. In response to these disappearances, Edwards faced a 7-month trial in 2012. The trial included around 240 witnesses and analyzed over 1,000 pieces of evidence. According to the Australian justice system, this investigation was one of the most complex, extensive, costly, and protracted in the country's history. It not only revealed the horrific crimes committed against the victims, but also shed light on the background of the Claremont killer, which contributed to his twisted behavior. Bradley Robert Edwards was born on December 7, 1968, in Australia. Little is known about his childhood, but some sources indicate that he attended elementary school in a town called Nung Dale during the 1970s. After that, he went to high school and later worked for a communications company until 2016. Edwards also served as a timekeeper for a company that organized children's track and field events. He was often considered strange by those around him, as he openly discussed his unusual fantasies. There were also rumors that he stole women's underwear from dryers in nearby houses. Even while living with his parents, some teenagers claimed he had a collection of women's underwear at home. As time went on, Edwards developed an interest in wearing women's clothing, identifying as heterosexual. This may have been a fetish that led to a series of criminal and inappropriate actions towards girls. In February 1988, when he was just over 19 years old, he committed his first known attack. The victim was an 18-year-old girl who was sleeping in her parents' house. She had only a slight acquaintance with Edwards, as their previous interactions had not been very close. In fact, she was the sister of a young man who had attended high school with Edwards. The girl woke up in the middle of the night and immediately sensed someone sitting next to her. At first, she thought it might be the guy she had celebrated All Saints' Day with just a few hours earlier. However, she quickly realized that was not the case. Before she could make a sound, Edwards covered her mouth with his hand. The girl hurried to calm the intruder. She thinks that the person who broke into her room was her boyfriend. It seemed that he covered her mouth only so that she would not scream in fear and thus not wake up her parents. Unfortunately, she was mistaken. Edwards pulled her head back and attempted to cover her face with a rag. In that moment, the girl told him that she loved him, which momentarily startled Edwards. The girl reached out to touch the face of the person lying next to her, only to be slapped by him. It was at that moment she realized the person was not her boyfriend, but an intruder. In a panic, she fought back, scratching Edwards' skin, which caused him to pull away. He quickly got off the bed and stood near the entrance of the room, wearing only a shirt. Realizing she was in danger, the girl began banging on the wall and screaming for her parents to wake up and help her. Fortunately, her cries frightened Edwards, and he fled, leaving behind a shirt that resembled a kimono and some evidence of his presence. This evidence became crucial in a major investigation that followed. Years later, Edwards's life had changed significantly. He met a girl by chance at a music festival in northern Western Australia. After their meeting, she ended her strong relationship with her boyfriend to be with Edwards, and eventually, Edwards moved in with her. The girl, whose name is not revealed, described her and Edwards's life as typical and rural. They owned several dogs and 1 horse. Each day, Edwards would drive her to work in his van before starting his own job. Occasionally, they would visit friends at a nearby farm for dinner or a barbecue. Overall, their life was unremarkable. As time passed, they began to consider marriage, with Edwards being just 22 years old at the time. It seemed that the idea of marriage was mostly pushed by his girlfriend, while he did not express much eagerness to take that step. One day, she started asking him questions about his intentions regarding marriage, which unhappy him. The following day, while working on a telephone connection at a local hospital, Edwards attacked a social worker. He approached her from behind and dragged her into a restroom. The victim fought back and managed to push him away. After that, he seemed to snap back to reality, standing next to her with a vacant stare. Although the victim escaped, the psychological impact of the attack had a lasting effect on her life. Later, after recognizing the attacker as an employee of a local telecommunications company, she reported him to his superiors. Surprisingly, instead of being fired, Edwards was promoted. Although this promotion occurred sometime later, it was clear that Edwards' employer supported him. His boss described him as a good worker who likely lost his temper due to personal issues. Edwards admitted his wrongdoing and promised to seek professional help. However, he was still convicted, though the charge was only for simple assault, which the victim strongly opposed. Until February 1995, Edwards' assaults did not appear to involve sexual violence. They mostly consisted of physical aggression and did not result in serious consequences, but they still affected the victims' lives. Meanwhile, his relationship with his common-law wife deteriorated over time. This likely happened because he chose to spend his free time on the computer instead of with her. According to her, Edwards eventually became emotionally distant, leading to the end of their cohabitation and relationship. On the morning of February 12, Edwards committed another attack. This time, he kidnapped a 17-year-old woman who was walking in one of the parks in Claremont. Reports indicate that the victim had just left a nightclub and was heading to her friend's house when she entered a poorly lit path leading to park. Edwards grabbed her from behind and forced her into his work van. He told her to be quiet, but at times, it seemed she was too terrified to move. As he put her in the van, he covered her head with a canvas bag and tied her ankles with makeshift handcuffs before driving toward the cemetery. There, he acted out his violent fantasies. During this ordeal, the girl was so shocked that she couldn't make a sound. She was in disbelief that this was happening to her. When it was over, Edwards discarded her in the bushes and calmly left the scene. Once she realized he was gone, the victim opened her eyes and rushed to the nearest hospital for help. Almost a year later, on January 27, 1996, an 18-year-old secretary named Sarah Spears also went missing. She disappeared from a similar area after leaving a nightclub around 2:00 a.m. 6 minutes later, she attempted to call a taxi from a phone booth. Although Sarah lived in the south of Perth with her older sister, she gave a different address when calling for the taxi. By the time the car arrived, she was nowhere to be found, or possibly because the driver did not see her in the dark. Witnesses reported hearing loud screams on the night Sarah went missing in the area where she could have been. They also noted seeing an unusual van parked nearby, but no significant leads were found. Sarah grew up in rural Western Australia, where her father, Don, worked primarily as a sheep shearer, a common occupation in the area. Sarah attended a boarding school in Perth and later took secretarial courses, eventually securing a job at a consulting company. Before her disappearance, she lived with her older sister, and they shared a close bond. Her family described her as cautious, which made it surprising that she chose to leave the nightclub alone. Around the same time Sarah disappeared, Edwards's relationship with his girlfriend was on the verge of ending. She had started seeing another man and may have even fallen in love with him. Initially, they were just friends and spent time together occasionally, but their relationship quickly evolved, prompting Edwards and his girlfriend to break up. They had shared responsibilities, including pets, a mortgage, and a car loan. A few months after their separation, Edwards' ex-girlfriend called to inform him that she was pregnant. It's unclear how he felt about this news, as he did not express any visible emotions. On June 9, 1996, another victim of Edwards went missing. This occurred around the time he learned that his ex-girlfriend was pregnant. The missing person was a 20-year-old nanny named Jane Rimmer. Before her disappearance, Jane had been out with friends, starting at a hotel called The Beach, then moving to the Hotel Continental, and finally heading to a nightclub. However, when they arrived at the nightclub, there was a long line at the entrance. Jane's friends decided to leave and called a taxi to go home, but she wanted to stay. The last known footage of Jane was captured by surveillance cameras at the Hotel Continental, where she was seen talking for several minutes to a dark-haired man who was facing away from the camera. Jane lived in an apartment in the western suburbs of Perth. Her mother reported that Jane had planned to have lunch with her the next day. According to her mother, it was unusual for Jane to miss such plans, especially since she typically came over to do her laundry around that time, which was part of her routine. Jane's relatives spoke with the police, described her as a cheerful, sociable, and friendly person. They mentioned that she enjoyed surfing and frequently visited the beach. Jane also loved children, which may explain why she took a job at a childcare services company after finishing school. Following her disappearance, police searched her home for clues, but they found nothing significant. After some time, local authorities established a special task force called the Macro Police to investigate two cases simultaneously. The first case involved the mysterious disappearance of Sarah on August 3, 1996. More than 50 days after Jane went missing, her remains were discovered by local citizens who were picking wildflowers about 40 kilometers from where she was believed to have been abducted. The remains were only partially covered by branches, likely torn from a nearby tree. Reports indicate that Jane had a neck wound and several superficial injuries on her wrists. At this time, Sarah was still reported missing. In the early morning of March 15, 1997, a 27-year-old lawyer named Kiara Glennon also disappeared. The day before her disappearance, she had been on vacation with friends at the Continental Hotel, but chose to return home earlier than the others. 3 men near the bus stop reported seeing Kiara around 12:30 a.m. They noticed her walking south along the Steer Highway while talking to a man driving in a car beside her. Just weeks earlier, Sierra had celebrated her 27th birthday after returning from a year-long trip around the world. Back in Australia, she stayed at her family's home. Kiara was born in Zambia, but her parents, of Irish descent, moved to Perth when she was young. She studied ballet passionately until adulthood. In 1992, she graduated from the University of Western Australia with degrees in law and Japanese language. Soon after, she completed an internship at a large law firm and continued working there until her departure. Relatives and friends of Kiara described her as an energetic, resourceful, persistent, and strong-willed girl, highlighting her wonderful sense of humor. After she went missing, law enforcement agencies began to suspect the involvement of a serial killer. The Western Australian state government offered a $250,000 reward for information leading to the identification of the criminal, marking it as the largest reward ever offered in the country. Meanwhile, detectives searched Ciara's room for evidence, but most items were related to her sister's upcoming wedding. 19 days after Kiara's disappearance, on April 3, 1997, her body was found by accident in a park, located several kilometers from where she was believed to have been abducted. Similar to Jane, Ciara had a knife wound in her neck, and her body was partially covered with branches. Notably, the murders of Jane and Ciara occurred while Edwards was with his future partner, a woman with a 3-year-old daughter. He met she in April 1997 when he went to her workplace to fix lightning-damaged wiring. Edwards surprised everyone by admitting his love for his new girlfriend within just a month of their first meeting. Since that time, their relationship has been progressing quickly. In a home video that was later obtained by the authorities, Edwards appeared joyful as he played tennis with her young stepdaughter, he offering little girl helpful advice during the game. Furthermore, it was reported that he frequently organized picnics in parks, hosted guests, and lived an otherwise normal life. According to Edwards' new partner, perhaps the infidelity of his previous partner had hurt his feelings greatly. The police focused their investigation on taxi drivers for a few reasons. First, the victims were last seen trying to use taxi services, which led authorities to this theory. Second, some witnesses reported seeing a car near the locations where the abductions took place, suggesting a possible connection. Despite conducting extensive DNA and fingerprint tests on numerous taxi drivers, these efforts did not yield any results. By April of the following year, investigators identified a main suspect, a 40-year-old civil servant named Lance Williams, who was frequently seen driving in the area of the abductions. However, after a lengthy period of surveillance and questioning by police, Lance never confessed to involvement in any of the cases. By 2008, after numerous interrogations, authorities concluded that he was no longer a suspect. One person initially considered a suspect was Bradley Murdoch, but he was later ruled out. Interestingly, at the height of the investigation, a special task force of over 100 police officers from different departments was involved. Despite their numbers, the task force did not achieve significant results and was nearly completely disbanded. Following this, the department focused on investigating serious crimes took over the case. The first significant breakthrough came in 2009 when a DNA match was found. Forensic officer George Payton and senior researcher Lowry Webb managed to extract DNA from the decomposed remains of Ciara and sent it to the UK for testing. Although similar tests had been done in Australia and New Zealand before, they had not yielded any noteworthy findings. Police officers continued to search for clues. In one UK laboratory, a special testing technique was used. This technique not available in Australia, it could obtain results from even the smallest tissue samples. Later, specialists in Australia compared the DNA obtained from the samples to their database. They found a match with the DNA of a person who had committed crimes against a 17-year-old girl in a city cemetery in 1995. This finding led authorities to conclude that all these crimes were committed by the same individual. However, the understanding of the crime in Western Australia only evolved in 2015, when police confirmed the connections between the cemetery crime, the murder of Jane, Ciara, and an attack on an 18-year-old in his own room in 1988. It's important to note that during this earlier crime, Edwards accidentally left behind a nightgown containing his biological material. In the early morning of December 22, 2016, officers from the Western Australia State Police Tactical Response Unit entered the home of Edwards and took him. When they handcuffed him, his first reaction was, "What the hell is going on here?" The officers quickly informed him that he was a suspect in the Claremont serial killer case. In disbelief, he responded, "You've got to be kidding." As they read him his rights, he expressed confusion about why they thought he was connected to the case. Indeed, up to this point, Edwards had led a rather quiet and calm life. His social media profiles indicated that he and his common-law wife had been active volunteers, and he had even received an award from the city for his community service. He had crafted an image of a normal person, but whether he really was one is another question. The next day, Edwards was taken into custody. Formal charges were brought against him. Some of these charges included aggravated murder, kidnapping, indecent exposure, and sexual assault. Meanwhile, police began a thorough search of the house where Edwards had lived for several years. The evidence found in the garage was so disturbing that much of it could not be presented in a public trial. This evidence included various illegal pornographic materials, homemade sex toys, bags containing his genetic material secured with hair ties, and a large collection of women's underwear with openings for male genitalia. One notable discovery was a series of documents or stories. The first was titled The Story of Chloe, the second was Sophie, and the third was Nicole. All these stories shared a common theme: a man kidnapped victims. It was unclear whether he had written the stories himself or downloaded them from the internet. In late October 2019, Edwards pleaded guilty to 5 out of the 8 charges against him. Meanwhile, Edwards denied the murder charge, claiming he had no involvement in the crimes. The main trial, led by Chief Justice Stephen Hall, began on November 25, 2019, at the prosecution's request. It was conducted without a jury due to significant public interest and the abundance of unique evidence. Approximately 240 witnesses testified during the trial, which lasted for 7 months. Throughout this time, Edwards chose to remain silent and did not provide any comments. He also declined to undergo a psychiatric evaluation that could have shed light on his motivations for committing such horrific acts. One of the key pieces of evidence came from the fabric fibers found on the victims' bodies during a thorough police investigation. A total of 98 fibers were collected, most of which matched the polypropylene fibers from the work uniform of Edwards. This uniform was custom-made for the company where he was employed, indicating that it couldn't have been purchased at a local store. Additionally, polypropylene fibers were discovered in Kiara's hair, and their composition and color perfectly matched the carpet in Edwards's work vehicle. He worked as a technician at a local telecommunications company, which meant he frequently drove a company car, a Holden Commodore executive station wagon with the Telstra company logo. He used this vehicle even outside of work hours. Witnesses, including a security guard from the cemetery, reported seeing this van parked near the cemetery without any apparent reason, this confirming it was the same car used by Edwards to abduct girls. Before that, the authorities were able to narrow down their list of suspects and track down the wanted criminal thanks to a relatively rare car. They might have made progress sooner, but they lacked crucial evidence, such as suspects' DNA. By September 2020, Edwards was convicted of the murders of Jane and Sierra, but he was found not guilty of the murder of Sarah Spears, resulting in no conviction for Sarah case. The sentencing was initially scheduled for December of the same year. Around that time, a woman who had been attacked in her bedroom in 1988 testified in court. She explained that she didn't see herself as a victim because she had survived the attack. However, she shared that since then, she has felt a constant fear every night, especially before going to bed, worrying that someone might attack her while she sleeps. The woman testified in court that she had been experiencing seizures, panic attacks, and sudden anxiety for a long time, and her mental health continued to decline. Another victim, who was kidnapped by Edwards and assaulted in a cemetery, stated that he robbed her of her youth. She found it difficult to articulate the profound effects this horrific experience had on her life. A third victim, who was assaulted in a city hospital, learned about Edwards' arrest when law enforcement contacted her. They informed her that the man who attacked her was a serial killer, which left her in shock. However, unlike many other victims, she was able to speak publicly about her experience and even wrote a book about it. Edwards' first common-law wife's partner also commented on the arrest, but he chose to remain anonymous. He expressed doubts about being the father of his daughter due to the recent events. Edwards' second partner testified in court. She revealed that she began to question Edwards' honesty in the early 2000s. This prompted her to check his bank accounts, where she found that he was withdrawing between $300 and $400 every few days. She noted that she and Edwards lived modestly and often faced financial struggles. Meanwhile, Edwards's relatives defended him vigorously. His nephew Adam Edwards portrayed him as a generous, straightforward, and approachable person, insisting that he could not possibly be a serial killer. On December 23, 2020, Bradley Robert Edwards was sentenced to life in prison with a 40-year probation period. This sentence was unprecedented and marked the longest in Western Australia's history. When Supreme Court Justice Stephen Hall announced the verdict, applause erupted in the courtroom. The judge noted that although there were aggravating factors for each crime, there was not enough evidence to prove that Edwards posed a continuous threat to others. Interestingly, Edwards's legal team had until February 3, 2021, to appeal the decision and argue for his innocence, but they never did. The local police commissioner remarked to news agencies that the court had imprisoned one of the country's most dangerous criminals. He expressed hope that Edwards would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of release. Additionally, he mentioned that he would continue to seek justice for another victim, Sarah Spears. The case against Edwards is considered one of the most expensive and lengthy criminal trials in Western Australia. By September 2020, its total cost had surpassed $11 million. Authorities also had to spend a substantial amount on providing the legally required defense services for the accused. Significant funds were allocated for the prosecution as well. The prosecution team consisted of 4 prosecutors and 5 state lawyers. Additionally, some witnesses and experts traveled to Australia from other countries. The prosecution compiled over 150 volumes, which included reports of their work and organized evidence of Edwards' crimes. Law enforcement officers established a comprehensive database containing various documents and case materials, totaling several thousand gigabytes. Additionally, civilians took part in their own investigations, including journalist Liam Bartlett. He believes that Edwards may have had many more victims. Among them, one potential victim is a 22-year-old woman named Julie Cutler, who vanished without a trace in June 1988 after leaving a hotel. There were other girls who also disappeared under similar circumstances, but currently, there is no information available about those cases. The conclusion of the Bradley Robert Edwards case, the Claremont serial killings, left a painful mark on Western Australia's crime history. Thanks to the efforts of forensic officers, researchers in the community were instrumental in solving the case and bringing justice to the victims. Edwards, whose brutality and involvement in the murder of Jane Rimmer and Kiara Glennon, was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, there are still unfortunate victims who have not found justice. This case reminds us of the need to uphold the law and fight to prevent similar crimes in the future. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Sabrina Zunich. Sabrina Zunich was born on October 27, 1994, in Cleveland, Ohio, United States. Her father is Mark Zunich, and her mother is Susan Edwards. Sabrina's family lived in social isolation. Both of her parents struggled with banned substance and alcohol addiction. They were arrested several times. Therefore, from the age of 3, her grandmother took over her upbringing. By the age of 4, Sabrina was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, a condition related to a nervous system disorder, which severely affected her ability to control herself. She also suffered from oppositional defiant disorder, anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder. Throughout her childhood, Sabrina faced great difficulties in controlling her behavior. She often displayed aggression and lack of self-control, leading to conflicts with her classmates. This continued throughout her adolescence, causing her to become increasingly isolated and unable to maintain normal social relationships. At age 14, Sabrina was removed from her grandmother's care and placed in an orphanage run by the Lake County Department of Children's Services. She lived in the orphanage for 2 years. In 2011, Sabrina was adopted by Kevin Knofel and Lisa. so moved to live with them in Willoughby Hills, Ohio. Lisa Knuffel is a compassionate woman who cares for and supports those around her. Lisa, born on May 2, 1971 in Reynoldsburg, Ohio, she is the daughter of Clark and Rita. After marrying Kevin, she moved to Lake County in 2000 and became the mother of two daughters, Megan and Haley. With a kind heart and a passion for learning, Lisa works as a social worker in the juvenile department of Cuyahoga County, Ohio. Her biggest dream is to open an orphanage where she can provide care and love to children in difficult circumstances. In here, Lisa met Sabrina. Joining the Knuffel family had a profound and transformative impact on Sabrina. As a high school student, she began to develop a love for learning, improved her grades, and started planning for her future. One day, Sabrina confided in her adoptive parents about her dream of becoming a model and pursuing a career in cosmetology. Seeing the positive changes in Sabrina, Lisa and Kevin were very happy and supported her. Sabrina also developed a deep bond with Lisa and the rest of the Knuffel family. Many people around them commented that Lisa and Sabrina seemed like real sisters. Sabrina often expressed her admiration for Lisa, considered her a role model, and affectionately referred to her as older sister. However, the peace in the family didn't last long. Problems emerged 6 months after Sabrina joined the household. Out of nowhere, Sabrina began accusing Lisa of not loving her and favoring Lisa's biological daughters. As the relationship between Sabrina and Lisa worsened, Sabrina grew closer to Kevin. Friends and family began noticing unsettling behavior between the two. Their conversations and jokes seemed more like those of a couple than a father and daughter. On October 27, 2012, Sabrina turned 18. Legally, she was supposed to leave the foster home and live independently. However, Sabrina requested permission from her adoptive parents to stay and finish high school. Then, in the early hours of November 16, 2012 at around 1 a.m., Sabrina grabbed a 10-inch serrated kitchen knife, entered Lisa's bedroom, and silently stood by her bed for 15 minutes, watching her sleep. Suddenly, Sabrina began stabbing Lisa repeatedly. Lisa woke up after the first strikes and screamed in pain. Her cries woke her 13-year-old daughter, Megan, who ran to the bedroom and saw Sabrina holding the knife. Terrified, Megan ran to call emergency services, sobbing and screaming that her sister was attacking her mother. When law enforcement arrived, they found Sabrina with several minor cuts on her body, holding a knife and appearing to be in shock. At this time, she followed officers' instructions to drop the knife and put her hands behind her head. She was arrested without resistance but refused to answer any questions once at the police station. During a search of the house, officers discovered Haley, Lisa's youngest daughter, locked in a closet. That night, Kevin was out of town on a business trip, he working as a truck driver. He learned about the incident when the police called him. Shortly after, Kevin called 911 to check on the condition of his daughters. He was told he could come to the police station to pick them up. The next day, Kevin arrived at the police station with an unexpectedly calm demeanor. His unusual composure surprised the officers. They thought they would see a man grieving over his murdered wife, but he seemed unperturbed. Without answering any questions, Kevin quietly took his daughters home without showing any obvious emotion. Kevin's attitude not only hard to understand the police, but also aroused concern from his and Lisa's relatives and friends. They found it strange that he did not appear sad or depressed after such a great tragedy. Immediately afterwards, Kevin tried to request to visit Sabrina in prison, but this request was denied. When he was not allowed to see Sabrina, Kevin's calm demeanor quickly turned to anger. He returned home with a visibly upset expression. The brutal crime shocked the local media. Lake County Police revealed that Lisa had sustained 178 injuries to her head, neck, torso, and limbs, Although Sabrina was quickly identified as the killer, investigators were initially baffled by her motive for committing such an appalling act. In the 10 months following the murder, detectives worked tirelessly to piece together the evidence. The suspicious relationship between Sabrina and Kevin became the focus of the investigation. Through interviews with those involved, some remarkable information emerged, shedding light on the complex nature of the case. One of the first revelations came from a close friend of Sabrina's. She said that Sabrina had confided that she had allowed Kevin to take nude photos of her in exchange for money. This event immediately raised suspicions about an illicit relationship between Kevin and his adopted daughter. In addition, just a week before the murder, Kevin had contacted a social worker to inform her that he and Lisa were considering divorce. During this conversation, Kevin expressed his intention to retain custody of Sabrina. Another shocking detail came from the testimony of another friend of Sabrina's. This person said that in early October 2012, Kevin asked her to help him find a hitman. This information led investigators to suspect that Kevin might be the mastermind behind the murder. During further investigation, police discovered that Kevin had purchased 2 life insurance policies worth a total of $800,000 in Lisa's name. Just days later, she was declared dead. Immediately after the murder, Kevin began spending lavishly, buying many expensive items. These actions were not only suspicious, but also suggested that Kevin had a financial motive for his wife's death. Initially, Sabrina denied any involvement of Kevin in the case. However, after 9 months in custody, in August 2013, she changed her testimony. Feeling abandoned by her adoptive father and not supported in her difficult situation, Sabrina decided to cooperate with investigators. In her testimony, she provides important details about Kevin's role and motive in killing Lisa, bringing the case to a crucial turning point. Sabrina accused Kevin of orchestrating Lisa's murder and shared specific details about their romantic relationship. She claimed her motive for killing Lisa was her deep love for Kevin and her refusal to share him with anyone else. According to Sabrina, their affair began in March 2012, when Kevin returned home exhausted from long hours of truck driving. Complaining of leg pain, Sabrina offered to massage his feet, which marked the beginning of their growing attraction. By September of that year, they had developed an intimate relationship. Sabrina stated that Lisa never suspected their affair because they behaved carefully. Kevin frequently sent Sabrina messages expressing his lack of love for Lisa and his desire to build a new life with Sabrina. Kevin proposed a plan to Sabrina, promising her a stable future funded by money from Lisa's insurance policies. He assured her that he would provide a house and a car, and suggested she could take Lisa's place as the daughter's mother. Sabrina hesitated, suggesting instead that Kevin file for divorce. However, Kevin rejected this idea, claiming Lisa would take the daughters away from him if they were to separate. He repeatedly joked that a dead Lisa was worth much more than a living one. Gradually, Kevin's plan to eliminate Lisa took shape, and they decided that Sabrina would kill Lisa by stabbing her. To make the murder appear as a failed robbery, Sabrina would also steal some of Lisa's jewelry. Kevin took additional steps to carry out the plan. He purchased the knife intended for the murder and researched how to deliver fatal blows to the victim. He also instructed Sabrina to feign mental instability if she were ever arrested. Sabrina revealed that the final turning point occurred on the morning of November 15, the day before the murder. While driving her to school, Kevin abruptly stopped the car and began crying. He admitted to Sabrina that he had fought with Lisa the previous night and confessed that he would self-harm if Lisa remained alive. Fearing that the man she loved might take his end life, Sabrina resolved to kill Lisa. Based on Sabrina's testimony, investigators decided to arrest Kevin. On August 9, 2013, he was taken into custody. He charged with conspiracy to commit aggravated murder and accessory to murder. In exchange for the possibility of parole, Sabrina agreed to testify against him. Besides, the defense has announced plans to appeal the verdict and intends to focus on expert testimony regarding Sabrina's mental health issues, arguing that her mental disorders were the sole reason she committed the murder. The trial of Kevin began in May 2014, the prosecutor asserting that there was no doubt regarding Sabrina committed the murder. However, he stressed that Kevin was fully aware of what would happen on November 16 and actively assisted Sabrina in planning the crime, which made him equally culpable. When Sabrina testified, she admitted to having an affair with Kevin and explained how they planned the crime together. She claimed the plan was Kevin's idea and said she went through with it only because she loved him and didn't want him to suffer. Sabrina told the jury she wanted justice, emphasizing that she wasn't the sole person involved. The prosecution focused on Kevin's suspicious behavior after Lisa's death, in an attempt to clarify his motives and his unusual demeanor. The police officer who met Kevin the day after the murder testified that Kevin appeared unusually calm and unemotional under such circumstances. A co-worker of Lisa's was also called to testify. She recalled that she brought food to Kevin's home after Lisa's death to comfort the family. However, she noticed that Kevin acted very calmly, seemingly unaffected by the loss. Lisa's co-worker also said that at the funeral, Kevin did not show any signs of grief, which struck her and others as unusual. In addition, a representative from the insurance company was also called to testify. This person revealed that Kevin had contacted them the morning after the murder, asking about the claim procedure from the life insurance policy he had purchased for Lisa not long before. These details were presented by the prosecution to highlight Kevin's cold and calculating nature in the events surrounding Lisa's death. The trial also included testimony from the Lake County medical examiner, who described the horrific injuries Lisa sustained. He detailed 2 fatal wounds, one to her jaw, which severed her carotid artery, and another to her chest. The examiner added that the large number of wounds indicated Lisa resisted fiercely and fought for her life for several minutes before succumbing to her injuries. These gruesome descriptions underscored the brutality of the crime. Although investigators could not provide copies of the text messages exchanged between Sabrina and Kevin, they presented data on the number of messages and calls exchanged. According to the cellular operator, the two exchanged 1,491 text messages and made 78 calls between November 1 and November 16, 2012. Kevin's lawyer argued that Sabrina should be considered solely responsible for Lisa's murder. He pointed out that investigators had no physical evidence proving Sabrina and Kevin were lovers. Furthermore, there were no specific text messages that directly implicated Kevin in planning Lisa's death. The defense argued that the prosecution's case rested entirely on Sabrina's testimony, which secured her a reduced sentence in return. The lawyer asserted that Kevin should be released, claiming the charges against him were baseless. He argued that Sabrina killed her adoptive mother not because of Kevin's influence, but because Lisa, 2 weeks earlier, had demanded Sabrina move out of their house by January 1, 2013. Meanwhile, Kevin refused to testify in court. Next, after a 9.5-hour hearing on June 11, the jury found Kevin Knofel guilty on all 11 charges. On August 6, 2014, Judge Joseph Gibson sentenced Kevin to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. This means Kevin will be eligible for parole in 2044, at the age of 73. After the trial, in which Sabrina gave detailed testimony about her role in Lisa's murder, the judges found her guilty of premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances. During the trial, Sabrina's defense attorney emphasized that she had admitted her guilt. Sabrina also confirmed this admission during a hearing in August 2014, expressing remorse for her actions. On September 29, 2014, at the age of 19, Sabrina Zunick was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. This means she will be eligible for parole in 2042, when she turns 47. Sabrina broke down in tears upon hearing the verdict. In explaining the sentence, the judge stated that the only reason Sabrina was being considered for parole was her cooperation with investigators. However, the judge also noted that, although Kevin manipulated and used Sabrina to carry out his plot, her brutal actions went far beyond original plan. In addition to the life sentence, the court ordered Sabrina to pay $6 million in compensation to Lisa's two biological daughters, Megan and Haley Knofel, to help them overcome the emotional and financial losses caused by their mother's death. Currently, Sabrina is serving her sentence at the Dayton Correctional Facility, a women's detention center in Ohio. The prison, established in 1987, is known for its rehabilitation and education programs designed to help inmates rebuild their lives. Sabrina will spend most of her life in prison, facing the consequences of her actions and the indelible memories of a murder that changed many lives forever. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Mark Orrin Barton. Mark Orrin Barton was born in April 1955. He was the son of a soldier and lived in many different places throughout his childhood, as his parents moved from China to various states. Later, his family moved to South Carolina. During this time, his parents' marriage began to have problems. Eventually, his mother filed for divorce and raised him on her own, but he maintained contact with his father. From a young age, Mark was a reserved person and found it difficult to connect with other children. Perhaps it was this loneliness, or the curiosity of adolescence, that led him to experiment with illegal substances, resulting in unwanted consequences. Mark quickly became addicted to hallucinogens and was caught stealing from pharmacies multiple times, but he did not face severe consequences. Nevertheless, these issues did not prevent Mark from going to college. He attended Clemson University and earned a degree in chemistry. Despite this, he struggled with his addiction throughout. After completing his education, Mark was arrested for theft again while trying to obtain money for drugs. This incident occurred just a month after he received his diploma, allowing him to avoid any academic repercussions. Had he still been in school, he likely would have been expelled. However, fate seemed to favor him many times as he escaped serious consequences for his mistakes and wrongdoings. This all took place during the psychedelic boom of the 1960s in the United States, a time when many people experimented with drugs, including Mark. Mark then decided to experiment on his own to create illegal substances, based on his knowledge of chemistry and passion. As a result, he encountered several overdoses during the experimentation process, leading to hospitalizations. In those cases, he was always saved, and many believed that he had two personalities, one being an excellent chemistry graduate student, and the other being a man struggling with addiction and psychological problems. By the age of 29, Mark had extensive knowledge of science but continued to face the challenges of drug addiction, which caused hallucinations. During this time, he moved to Georgia, where he met his future wife, Deborah Spivey. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they soon got married. Mark found a job, but when he became a co-founder of a chemical production company, his employer required him to relocate to Alabama. Unfortunately, due to various issues, he lost that job shortly afterward. During this period, his mental health began to decline rapidly. Deborah noticed increasing signs of paranoia and witnessed his emotional outbursts. He became convinced that people wanted to harm him and often acted nervously and strangely, believing he was being followed and monitored. Despite these challenges, Deborah loved Mark and wanted to help him. They had 2 children together, Matthew and Michelle. However, as Mark's mental health continued to deteriorate, the atmosphere in their home shifted. He began to display more manipulative and controlling behavior, particularly towards Deborah. This situation quickly escalated, and Deborah started to feel unsafe for herself and their children. She frequently expressed her concerns to friends and family, mentioning that Mark's unsettling gaze frightened her. During this difficult time, Mark was fired from his job because his team complained about his inappropriate behavior. The day after Mark was let go, a curious incident occurred. Someone hacked into the company's computers, deleted data, and stole information. Mark denied any involvement, but the investigation soon connected him to the crime, proving that he was the hacker. He was arrested, but surprisingly, the company decided to drop most of the charges against him, resulting in his release after a brief period of imprisonment. It was later discovered that Mark had manufactured and sold several illegal chemicals while co-founding the company. To protect his reputation, the company allowed Mark to leave without being prosecuted. There were no records of his criminal activities, as the employers reported to the police that their dispute had ended peacefully. The scandal started when their family moved to Atlanta, Georgia. Mark quickly found a prestigious job at a manufacturing company, known for its chemical production. During this time, he also became a sales representative for chemicals at another organization. Deborah shared with her loved ones that Mark's condition had significantly improved. She felt positive about their marriage and believed their relationship could be salvaged. This was important to her because if they divorced, their children would be hurt. During this time, Mark became more relaxed and appeared to have stopped using drugs. However, there were simpler reasons for this change. While working, he meets a 20-year-old girl named Leigh Ann, who has just started working as a secretary at the company where he works. They hit it off and soon began flirting, dating each other. Mark fell deeply in love with her, and their affair lasted for quite a while. By 1993, it seemed like Mark had no problems at all. He looks great, is active, makes a lot of money, doesn't do drugs, has a loving wife, beautiful children, and even a mistress. Everything appeared calm until Deborah started to suspect him of cheating. Initially, Deborah tried to reassure herself, thinking that Mark was simply experiencing a midlife crisis. He had indeed started taking better care of himself and looked younger. However, suspicions about him having an affair began to emerge. He insisted he had no affairs and was only trying to maintain his youthful appearance. At the beginning of 1993, he purchased a life insurance policy for Deborah worth $600,000. It was later discovered that he had tried to buy a contract for over $1 million, but he did not have enough money to pay for it. In June 1993, Mark and his lover Leigh went on a trip together. Mark tried to convince his wife, Deborah, that it was just a business trip to a nearby state. During this time, he confessed his love to Leigh and expressed his desire to leave Deborah for her. Leigh agreed to the relationship, but insisted that he must first get a divorce. However, Deborah did not agree to a divorce immediately. She threatened to initiate a lengthy divorce process, which could take a year or more due to the complex issues involved. At the time, Mark and Deborah were working with a family law attorney, and as expected, the process was lengthy as parenting plans needed to be drawn up and child support issues resolved. In early September 1993, Deborah planned a weekend vacation to the lake with her mother and family. Those around her knew about the problems in her marriage to Mark, but believed they were trying to work through their issues. Everything seemed normal. Deborah invited her husband Mark to join them and wanted to take their children along, but their daughter got sick. Their son Matthew, a Boy Scout, had an important camping trip that weekend. Mark told Deborah he needed to stay home with the kids and suggested she go to the lake with her mother, which she agreed to do. Deborah remained determined to carry out her plans and headed to the lake, where her mother, Eloise, was supposed to meet her. The last time anyone saw them together was on the evening of September 4, 1993. Everything seemed peaceful and normal. However, on Monday, September 6th, they did not return home as expected. Deborah's father tried to contact both his daughter and wife, but they did not respond to his calls. Mark also claimed he had no information about their whereabouts. Consequently, Deborah's father went to the police to request a welfare check and provided the address of their lake house. The police arrived at the lake house, but when they knocked on the door, no one answered. After a few minutes, they walked around the area but saw nothing suspicious other than cars parked in the driveway. It appeared that Eloise and Deborah were still nearby, but there was no sign of them. Officers then discovered an unlocked trailer on the property and decided to investigate further. Inside, they encountered a gruesome scene. Deborah and Eloise had been murdered. There were signs of a struggle and a search for valuables, but nothing was taken except for Deborah's wedding ring. The suspect appeared to have left other valuables behind, such as a weapon left on the kitchen counter and several $100s in cash that Deborah had in her pocket. There was no sign of forced entry, indicating the possibility that Deborah and Eloise knew their attacker. It seemed they might have been careless and failed to lock the trailer, allowing the intruder access. Mark quickly became the prime suspect. He was financially motivated, it was the insurance money, and he was obviously stressed about the issues that were coming up regarding divorce, child support, and custody. Deborah is likely to gain the upper hand in their legal battle, making her removal beneficial to him. He could have seized the chance to kill her in a secluded area without any witnesses. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the vicinity. After the funeral, the police searched Mark's house but found nothing. They were also interested in his car, where they discovered several drops of blood on the steering wheel and ignition switch. Mark claimed the blood was from a recent cut on his finger. Unfortunately, the blood samples could not be analyzed because they were contaminated with soda, making it impossible to determine whether the blood belonged to Deborah and Eloise. As a result, the police released Mark after questioning. Several witnesses who went camping with Mark and his son Matthew said he left for a few hours and may have committed the crime. This meant he did not have a solid alibi. Despite this, the case was eventually closed. Deborah's relatives were devastated that her children, Michelle and Matthew, were left without their mother and that the perpetrator was never caught. The detectives quickly gave up on the investigation after the double murder. A week after Mark returns home, his mistress, Lee, moves in with him. She begins to act like a mother, even trying to replace the children's biological mother, Deborah. After the case was closed, Mark received a payment from Deborah's life insurance policy, but it was only half of the total amount, $294,000. Dissatisfied with the payment, he sued the insurance company, which increased the payout to $450,000. From this amount, $150,000 was allocated to a trust fund for their children. At this time, Mark openly expressed his feelings for Lee, declaring that he had never loved anyone so much. It was no surprise when they quickly got married. With the money from the insurance, Mark decided to quit his job to pursue a new business venture, becoming a trader at a brokerage firm. However, after Deborah's death, Mark's emotional state deteriorated. The profitable trading opportunities he once saw turned into multiple losses due to his numerous mistakes. Lacking financial knowledge and experience, he continued to place large bets, leading to further losses. By June 1999, Mark had not only lost his entire fortune, but was also $105,000 in debt from the securities he had managed at the firm. This financial trouble resulted from numerous failed transactions he made during that time. Eventually, Mark was fired and lost his trading license. However, he didn't give up and found a new job at a technology investment firm called Momentum Securities, located across the street from his previous workplace. During this time, he was struggling with mental health issues, but no one knew it. Mark was finally fired on July 29, 1999. Mark then visited his former workplace, Momentum Securities in Atlanta. Upon entering, he spoke with several former colleagues. They found nothing unusual about their conversation and later expressed shock at Mark's subsequent actions. He suddenly drew two weapons and attacked. As a result, 4 people died on the spot. Before leaving, he attempted to kill his boss and mentor, Burda. Fortunately, Burda survived. Mark's actions were not random, he had a clear intent. He specifically targeted the office of his former employer, Momentum Securities, where he had been fired for embezzlement. He then planned to continue the attack at a neighboring firm, All-Tech Investment Group, where he had also been fired. Calmly crossing the street amid the chaos, he entered and encountered Kevin Dial, the office manager. Without saying a word, Mark attacked Kevin in the chest, killing him instantly. The situation escalated when Mark went on to kill 3 other traders, causing panic as people rushed to escape. Immediately afterward, Mark entered the conference room and began attacking the employees inside. The first person he injured was the company's co-founder. By the time the police arrived, the building was sealed off, and Mark had already fled. In the chaos, he managed to escape, but one witness saw him navigate through the crowd, get into a green minivan, and drive away. This witness remembered the vehicle's license plate and reported it to the arriving officers, which helped them identify Mark by checking the car's information in their database. Unfortunately, they could not track him down immediately. He vanished in an unknown direction, and efforts to follow the car were unsuccessful. As a result, the police turned to the media to share information about the incident and seek assistance from the public. They needed to warn people that Mark, a dangerous individual with a weapon, was on the loose. Within the first 30 minutes, tips started coming in. An employee at a gas station reported seeing Mark fill up his car and drive off. Additionally, a girl contacted the police, stating that an unknown man had attacked her, left a weapon with her, and threatened her. Fortunately, she was able to escape from him. The police quickly realized that Mark seemed intent on taking a hostage to facilitate his escape. Afterward, they were able to trace his movements, and a large-scale pursuit began, which concluded rapidly. Mark found himself trapped in a dead end, surrounded. As the police approached his car and drew their weapons, a loud bang rang out. In a desperate attempt to avoid capture, he attacked himself in the head, realizing that his escape plan had failed. As a result, he died on the spot. Now, investigators needed to determine what led Mark to resort to violence. Detectives visited his home, hoping to speak with his second wife, Lee. When they couldn't reach her by phone, suspicions arose that she might have fled. The authorities suspected that Mark could have had an accomplice and might still be planning further violence. It was puzzling that a well-educated businessman would suddenly turn to armed violence. However, when the police searched the house, they discovered something entirely unexpected. In the master bedroom closet, they found that Lee had been beaten to death. They also discovered the bodies of Mark's 2 children, Michelle and Matthew, who had also been beaten to death in their beds. The children's bodies were left uncovered, with towels wrapped around their heads so that only their faces were exposed. The police identified the murder weapon, a baseball bat, which Mark had used to smash the heads of his family members. Forensic analysis indicated that Mark killed Lee 2 days before the tragic incident at Momentum Securities. The following day, he attacked his children in the living room. A letter left at the crime scene provides details of what happened. On the morning of July 27, 1999, Mark decided to kill Lee. He claimed to have planned an unforgettable weekend for his children, which he saw as a farewell. In a letter, Mark confessed to killing Lee and her 2 children from a previous marriage, Matthew and Michelle, while they were sleeping. After killing his family, Mark covered their bodies with sheets and placed notes on each of them. Investigators discovered symbolic gifts with the children, a teddy bear and a handwritten note on Michelle's chest, and a similar note along with a video game on Matthew's body. Both notes were dated July 29. Mark did not explain his motives clearly, believing no one would understand his actions. Instead, he expressed his deep hatred for life and societal values, which he had felt for months leading up to his drastic choice. He claimed to have loved his family and hoped to reunite with them in heaven. He aimed to kill them quickly and painlessly, thinking that the children would suffer without their parents, and he believed God would take care of them in the afterlife. Detectives believe Mark was dishonest in a letter he wrote, in which he claimed that he saw death as his only escape. Instead, he planned to let Lee and the children die with him. He did not die immediately after the massacre. Rather, he attacked his workplace and fled. Mark initially intended to start a new life, but felt compelled to die when he realized he would face prison. In total, 9 of his former colleagues and 3 family members died, while 13 others were injured but survived. However, many people think that Deborah and Eloise should also be counted among the victims. At the time, his children were 8 and 11 years old, and his young wife Lee was 27. Before going to Alabama, Mark intended to take the lives of those he believed wanted him dead. His first wife, Deborah, often expressed to her loved ones that moving to Alabama marked the start of his downfall. After moving in, Mark's work performance declined rapidly, leading to his dismissal. He was later caught sabotaging company data, but this incident was kept low profile to avoid damaging the startup's reputation. As a result, Mark received a short prison sentence. Having lost all his money and faced multiple firings, Mark became despondent. The police found similarities between the murders of his first wife, Deborah, and her mother, Eloise, who were both killed in a trailer. Mark is the prime suspect, but has consistently denied any involvement, yet the police consider him guilty. The murders shared a similar method, and the same weapon was used. Additionally, he was the only one with a strong motive. He also had access to their home and was among the few who knew where Deborah was with Eloise, as there were hardly any strangers in that area. Neighbors were aware of Mark's frequent arguments with Deborah, leading them to believe he was the one who had killed her. Currently, it is impossible to prove Mark's involvement in the deaths of Deborah and Eloise, as Mark, the only person who could have confessed to the crime, has since died. Authorities suspect that Mark's motive for attacking Deborah was the insurance payout he received shortly after the murder. He used this money to support his trading career, favoring high-risk investments that ultimately failed. The reason he blamed those around him for his financial losses in the stock market remained unclear. None of Mark's colleagues understood his aggression, especially since his targets were just ordinary workers doing their jobs. These individuals had done nothing to harm him and were not responsible for his failures or job loss.